Arc 5, Stars that Engrave History. Chapter 15, A Deafening Silence. The next morning, a bleary-eyed Subaru stood in the sunlit courtyard. Feeling the hard gravel and sand through his shoes, he took a deep breath of the cool morning air. Amelia directed a smile at the pleased Subaru as he gave a relaxed, "Mm." "Amelia, what is it? Subaru seems happy today, did something nice happen?" "Subaru, many nice things happened. An important event happened last night. Amelia's charming braid was an unexpected treat, and the baths were spacious and comfortable." "Amelia, I can say the same. I also took a very comfortable bath yesterday. The bathhouse in the Roswell mansion is great, but the bath surrounded by stones here is so fresh." Last night, the beauty of Amelia's melodiously flowing silver hair, as the braid Subaru had made swayed, had been breathtaking. Although her usual long straight hair also showed her frosty, snow-like beauty, seeing an unusual hairstyle on her had its own sense of privilege. Anyway, Amelia, whatever she looked like, was always equally appealing. With that in mind, Subaru turned his attention back to the present as Amelia spoke again. Although indoors, the bath went as far as it could to resemble an open-air bath, and the decorations evoked a natural image of the outdoors. Cobblestone covered the ledges along the bath's wall. If it had been marble instead, the bath would have lost much of its uniqueness. "Amelia, since I saw this type of bath for the first time, I ended up having a lot of fun frolicking with crush sand and felt shine." "Subaru, that's a prime fan service scene from a gal game. It's a CG that's absolutely necessary to collect." "Amelia, CG. Subaru, it's nothing, I was just teasing you. You seem happy, are you?" "Amelia, very." Amelia, whose happiness was shared with Subaru, also seemed at a glance joyful, and this feeling alleviated the initial anxiety and suspicion that had accompanied their trip to Pristella. The issue was, "Subaru, those two over there have such unhappy, gloomy-looking faces." "Beatrice, it's nothing, in fact." "Otto, please don't mind me, heek. I just had a little, too much to drink." Standing where Subaru was pointing was a lowly with a frosty expression on her face, and a man whose usually elegant features were pale. Needless to say, these two were Beatrice and Otto. After some careful consideration, Subaru decided to say hello to the almost transparent Otto. "Subaru, Otto. You were a no-show at dinner yesterday, where'd you go?" "Otto, like I said when we parted ways, it's rare for me to have a chance to come to Pristella, and while, we're here, I wanted to establish some connections." "Subaru, what's up with you? You're even more drunk than you were when we first met." "Otto. My memory might be messed up, but my first meeting with Natsuki-san didn't seem to involve alcohol." "Subaru, well, it's your own memory, so think what you will." Otto, who was reproached for an unknown reason, wore a helpless expression, although Subaru's comments were all moot. From Subaru's perspective, he had numerous first meetings with Otto, but his first one was with a frustrated Otto in a tavern, who had been as equally pale as the current one. Shortly afterwards, however, Subaru had returned from death. Therefore, from Otto's point of view, their first meeting had been the embarrassing one in which Subaru had been responsible for saving him from the witch cult. Of course, it was futile to argue, since both would be wrong. "Subaru, don't do things that would give Biko bad habits. Well, I can understand that you were in a rush to help our faction." "Otto, I did this all of my own volition. Even though I have no idea why I did this to myself." Otto, whose head seemed to be feeling rather heavy, was unable to respond to Subaru. After a moment he looked up at the courtyard, changing the course of the conversation with an "actually." "Otto, what happened to Garfield? It's rare to not see him up at this time. Isn't it convention for him to get up earlier than anyone earlier so he can find the highest location to yell from?" "Subaru, there's probably not anywhere high up here, but that isn't why he's not here. Though, that would be his own juvenile secret. Please be gentle with him the next time you meet." "Otto, to someone who has no idea whatsoever as to what happened, aren't those words too misleading? My head still hurts." "Subaru, you're certainly self-destructive." Watching a night comatose Otto collapse onto the floor, Subaru smiled. He then turned around and looked at Beatrice, who had been silent since the beginning of their exchange. "Subaru, so, what about Biko? Yesterday, you were so lively, but now you're all gloomy. That's so uncute." "Beatrice, don't just assume things, I suppose. I'm not feeling gloomy, in fact. Betty just suddenly remembered a few things, which she has to carefully scrutinize, I suppose." "Subaru, what's the matter? If you have any trouble, spit it out. If it's something dangerous, one person might not know how to handle it." Surprised at what Beatrice had said, Subaru narrowed his eyes slightly, and gave a gesture indicating his readiness. Amelia also nodded as if she were listening carefully. Beatrice bit her lips, revealing a rare hesitation, before choosing her words with a pompous air. Beatrice, it started yesterday, after Subaru abandoned me to play with Garfield, in fact. Subaru, a questionable interpretation, but go on. Beatrice, Betty had gone to look for Amelia to kill time with, I suppose. On the way to her room, I ran into an employee, who I made a little bit of small talk with, in fact. Subaru, Biko, making small talk. Learning that Beatrice's ability to communicate had improved somewhat left Subaru speechless. He turned to Amelia, shocked, and she gave an eager nod. Incredible. The notion of Beatrice initiating conversations with strangers was entirely unexpected. Maybe the freshness of travel had let Beatrice experience an unexpected growth. After returning home, he needed to update the Biko's growth diary with this development as soon as possible. The diary, which recorded the Biko's daily growth, had already reached 3 volumes. Thanks to this journey, he could add a new page. Unaware that her daily activities were being recorded, Beatrice found Subaru and Amelia's attention annoying and always reacted with a dissatisfied "You're exaggerating, I suppose." Beatrice, I'll keep talking, in fact. When the waiter saw Betty, he said he had news and put on a very mysterious expression, I suppose. He told me at night, something scary will haunt this hotel, in fact. Subaru. Beatrice, honestly, when Betty heard, she hesitated to tell anyone so as not to create unnecessary confusion, I suppose. Although, I still decided to do some preparation last night as a precaution, in fact. Beatrice's voice rose as she became worked up, and she didn't notice how Subaru had fallen silent. Then, she dropped her voice to a whisper, as ceremoniously as if she were spreading a little-known secret. Beatrice, in the middle of the night, Betty heard something strange, I suppose. I didn't want to wake up Subaru, who had a stupid expression on his face as he slept, so I quietly left our sleeping quarters alone to investigate, in fact. Subaru, you shouldn't stare at someone else's sleeping face. Beatrice, oh, of course I didn't stare, I suppose. I just gave a glance, as a lady's etiquette dictates, in fact. She might not have looked at the sleeping Subaru at all, but it was so cute that Subaru put the matter aside for time being. Biko took Subaru's acquiescence as a sign to continue, and her mysterious expression reappeared. Beatrice, Betty found an unusual presence hovering near the hotel, so I tracked it, I suppose. After a while, I finally found its source on the front porch. Subaru, you found it? Beatrice, well, there was a dangerous pale face slowly emerging from the darkness, I suppose. It seemed to be besieging Betty, so she confronted it, in fact. Beatrice's petite forehead shone faintly with sweat, as if she were fully immersed in the grim situation she'd been in last night. Although Subaru didn't understand how a spirit's sweat glands worked, it made the atmosphere rather tense, so he chose to not comment on it. Beatrice, shortly after, probably due to its fear of Betty's power, the figure slowly melted back into the darkness, I suppose. After repeatedly confirming that there would be no trouble later, Betty returned to the room, in fact. Then I stepped over the idiotically sleeping Subaru to return to bed, I suppose. Subaru, don't peep on someone sleeping, it's indecent. Beatrice, I only confirmed that you were okay, I suppose. Absolutely no such thing like touching your forehead or eyebrows happened, in fact. This was certainly a self-admission, but because it was so cute, Subaru again neglected to mention it. All in all, that seemed to be the end of Beatrice's horror story. Subaru held his chin and nodded slightly as he began to consider what she had said. A strange event had happened at the end. The incredible, strange things in this world were hardly few in number. Actually, after spending a year in the parallel world, he could navigate its strangeness fairly well. For example, using common sense, he could conclude that no ghosts existed in this place. As far as common sense goes, even calling this a haunting seemed to be a poor assertion. Even so, that kind of weird rumor still existed here, and that the hotel had even inherited a story about Japanese-style spirits was really rather incredible. Subaru heartily admired this phenomenon, as he took a conclusive breath. Subaru, so, what happened last night, Otto? Otto, I remember now. As I lay on the porch, still on the verge of vomiting, I noticed that Beatrice-chan was staring at me, but I was unable to speak at the time. Finally, I couldn't hold back and went to vomit in the bushes, and once I'd come back, she'd vanished. Subaru, that would be it then. Beatrice, how is this? How is it possible, in fact? It was almost too much for Beatrice to handle. It was, at this point, incredibly obvious that the true face of the so-called specter was actually a drunk Otto, and she had no idea what to say. What she'd been certain she'd seen was relentlessly denied, and Beatrice looked as if her ability to reason had vanished. Subaru stroked her as though comforting her, but in his heart he concluded that Beatrice was bad at sleeping in unfamiliar surroundings. The waiter, who described the specter to Beatrice, had surely seen that Beatrice was the epitome of someone who was gullible, and would take any kind of prank too seriously. Her red face, full of remorse and dissatisfaction, was so adorable that Subaru gave it the highest level of praise. Felt, yo, everyone's gathered here already. A light female cut into the crowd of laughter. Looking to the source of the sound, Subaru spotted a figure in the corridor, a girl shaking out her short, golden hair. Felt. She had replaced the bathrobe with her usual light attire, swinging her slender arms with ease, looking more or less like a girl from the streets. Subaru, morning. You're dressed so casually, I can just feel Reinhardt's lament. Felt, don't preach about it, that guy annoys me with it so much, and even Ramji is on his side. It's such a bother. Voicing her dissatisfaction, an impatient Felt leapt from the corridor and landed beside Otto, who wasn't paying much attention to what was going on. She then turned toward Subaru and crooked her head to ask. Felt, having said that, there's a thing that I've been curious about. Subaru, what is it? Felt, that is to say, why have you all been doing this weird dance together? Felt wore a curious expression as she watched Subaru's strange dance, his radio gymnastics. Whether before starting a long journey, or taking a few steps on the road, everyone would start their morning with radio gymnastics. This scene had long appeared every morning in not only the Roswell mansion, but across the entirety of the Mathers territories. Subaru, it's just the secret to health and longevity. Performed by everyone from the children to the elderly, the age of the popular radio gymnastics of healthiness will reign. After Amelia Tan becomes the king, our radio gymnastics will become a government-mandated morning activity. Amelia, yeah, I'd be happy if everyone could do it together. Felt, that's... I can't help but feel that if such a thing becomes reality, the king's reputation will be ruined. Scrutinizing their movement, Felt muttered her cynical thoughts. It was saddening to see, but sooner or later, even those who hadn't wanted to follow along were drawn into it after realizing the benefits of this easily performed activity. The popularity of this movement after it has spread to the various villages was indeed high. Subaru, Biko and Otto were also reluctant from the very beginning, but now they even participate despite having suffered through a lonely night of fear, or a morning of a hangover. Beatrice, Betty was dragged into this by Subaru, in fact. Otto, I obviously just wanted to sleep off my headache, but then I heard the claps and saw the dancing. Beatrice, even if I've become sick of this, I'm addicted. Otto, utterly fascinating. Beatrice and Otto gave a somewhat weak explanation, while Subaru and Emilia stood proud. Felt scratched her white neck as she pondered the two distinctly different sets of responses. Felt, indeed, I often hear of popular, strange activities happening in sisters' vicinity. Strange dances, hollowed-out pumpkins, women carefully baking food for their beloved as a gift. It's like that. Subaru, although now they're only unique occurrences in the border territories, I know that one day it will be turned into a nationwide popularization project. Considering this, we could try using Anastasia-san in our schemes. Valentine's Day would revolutionize the snack industry, and the markets would broaden. If the topic of large economical shift came up, Anastasia would immediately find a way to capitalize on it. If it wasn't too late, Subaru considered catching Anastasia when she was free to discuss those opportunities with her. Felt, has brother always given off that kind of feeling? Emilia, well, Subaru has always been that way. It seems like he's teasing, but he really wants to improve things, even if he pretends he's always joking. Felt, yeah, but you don't even know if he's joking or not until the dust settles. Emilia's answer slightly flustered Felt. Occasionally this kind of thing would happen due to Emilia's spiritual age. For her, seeing eye to eye with Felt was like a child trying to look an animal in the eyes. Felt, who struggled and crawled her way up in slums, also had her unique way of living. Emilia, why is Feltchan all alone? Isn't Reinhardt worried when you're not together? Felt, I'm not some kid who needs to be taken care of, and besides, that guy is just annoying when he's near me, so I just told him to go off somewhere, since sister and everyone else would be here. It's so annoying, as soon as anything happens, that guy arrives in the blink of an eye. Emilia, right. Then I feel at ease. Emilia carelessly chuckled at Felt's complaint. Receiving a response which didn't match her expectations, Felt gave an anxious sigh and began playing roughly with her blonde hair. Emilia, Feltchan, you have such beautiful hair, you shouldn't play with it so crudely. I've been taught by Subaru and Frederica-san to respect hair. Felt, damn, you're so bossy, let me mind my own hair, and didn't I say to stop adding Chan to my name? It gives me goosebumps. Emilia, even if you say so, I can't drop this habit all at once. I'll try my best, but if I can't hold back, I'll be very sorry. Is that fine? Felt, it's not fine in the slightest. Because Emilia didn't hold any maliciousness, Felt could only give a low, cat-like growl to vent her irritation. Simply on the surface level, people hearing their conversation would smile, as their exchange resembled a secret language between best friends. Subaru, well, our radio gymnastics are done, so feel free to go to bed. Or you could take a bath, they're nice and refreshing. Otto, I'd already taken a bath, but sadly, the smell of alcohol didn't seem to wash away. Subaru, before Garfield shows up to yell at you, you'd best hurry up and wash it away. In my hometown, there's a saying that any issue can be solved with a few hot baths. Subaru reached out a hand to the weak Otto as he finished speaking. Otto, it would be a catastrophe if he saw me like this. Since you gave me your advice, I'll follow it while I still have my life. Subaru lifted Otto to his feet and gave his weak shoulder a pat. Otto sighed, still despondent, as Subaru gazed up at the sky. A sky full of smiles. Thin clouds hung in the early morning sky, reflecting the calm weather. Just as Subaru came to note this. Good morning, citizens of Pristella. Subaru, huh? A loud sound seemingly appeared out of thin air, echoing in everyone's ears, surprising the unprepared Subaru. It wasn't an illusion. As Subaru looked around in panic, he saw Emilia, Felt, and Beatrice also glancing around, alarmed. Subaru, hey, what's this? It's a really loud voice. Felt, it's not some kind of fantasy, it's just a loud voice in the streets. Felt whispered softly to herself, while Subaru also made his own commentary, while suspecting that this wasn't unrelated to magic. Speaking of magic that could send sound to an entire group of people, Subaru recalled the chain magic that Julius used to connect everyone's consciousness. Ultimately, however, it was simply a way of connecting people mentally in a limited range and couldn't deliver sound directly to the ears. Pondering this, Subaru thought that he'd found a suitable answer. That was... Subaru, something like a loudspeaker? Felt and Subaru had provided similar comments on the phenomenon. Resounding the sky, the noise was loud enough that the entire city could probably hear it, in a very similar way to announcements made from a loudspeaker. The only problem was that in this world, there had yet to be any sign of such a scientific and technological development. Otto, you didn't know? This radio functions with the help of a mana-powered instrument in Pristella's Metropolitan Government Hall. Subaru, mana, so it's magic. Otto answered Subaru's question, nodding as if to say, yes. Otto, what I heard yesterday, when I was drinking with a great variety of people, was that every morning the City Hall's magically amplified radio would make an announcement to the citizens of Pristella. Subaru, that's such a strange daily routine. Otto, information that needs to be conveyed to all of the city's areas can be heard immediately and conveniently. In the event of an emergency, evacuations or directions can be given easily. In order to keep such a stressful time from being too chaotic, doing this every morning allows the citizens to get used to the speaker. Subaru, I wouldn't have thought of that. Using a magical device to prepare for emergencies. Small villages were trouble enough, but if an accident took place in the city, handling it would quickly become a pandemonium. The preemptive countermeasure that had been taken to prevent this also had practical use. It was unusual and fairly innovative for someone to take the time to ensure that the citizens would be well prepared for it. Subaru, it looks like a pretty smart guy is responsible for this, maybe the mayor? Otto, no, since the device runs on mana, it requires mana stones to fuel, so Kiritaka is most likely responsible for the radio. Subaru, His admiration was suddenly interrupted by that impact. Kiritaka was most likely the one who'd yelled "Don't touch my Liliana" yesterday. Scenes of the negotiation flashed through Subaru's mind. The screaming. The flash of the magical stone. The elegant man who'd cried for Liliana afterward. Subaru, no. Beatrice, no way in fact. Emilia, that seems a little. At Subaru, Beatrice and Emilia's perfect synchronization, Otto smiled wryly. Otto, I thought that you'd reply like this, but the one who manages the radio is in fact Kiritaka. Listen, isn't that voice familiar? Kiritaka, this is a magical device which can transmit my voice throughout the entire city. If I startled anyone unfamiliar with this, I offer my apologies. You're very lucky to be hearing this broadcast today. Subaru, who's that? Despite Otto's follow-up, Subaru still had difficulty associating this voice with his impression of Kiritaka. He was so serious that it didn't sound like a Lilicon at all. Subaru, no, wait. Klein-san also doesn't seem like a degenerate. Could it be that Lilicons are clever at disguising themselves? Lilicons with social status are terrifying. Subaru again recalled the omnipotent butler. He had overwhelming intelligence and ability, but it was mixed with that kind of irrational nature. Although it wouldn't be quite right to call Klein a representative of all Lilicons, it wasn't impossible that there would be case of a high-class Lilicon who resembled him. Subaru, well, this Kiritaka guy is still very suspicious, and impressions from voices aren't the most reliable. Kiritaka, and to those who are listening, allow me to deliver, filled with my feelings, no. Filled with your feelings, a world of blessings. The morning has finally come. This is the songstress Liliana, please be sure to listen. Liliana, it's me. In the midst of this mess, the man of Subaru's memories and the man making the broadcast finally aligned. This bother had decided to plague Subaru even in the early morning. He heard the shuffling sound of people changing locations, and then a slight cough which seemed to contain a smile. Liliana, well, hello everybody, this is Liliana, who was just introduced. Doing this every morning makes me feel the weight of expectation, but I still want to do my best to sing and play to create joy. Please oblige me. Subaru immediately recognized Liliana's characteristic way of speaking, and felt as if he could see her odd behavior even through the magical device. Curiously, unlike Kiritaka's voice, which intermittently faded though the magic radio, not a trace of Liliana's voice was lost. Subaru didn't know if there was such a concept as magical device affinity, but if there were such a thing, it would suit the girl whose voice shared the name goddess of song to be able to sing clearly through the static. Liliana, well, I'm eager to sing. Please listen the Sword Demon's Love Song, Act 2. Liliana inhaled gently as she prepared instrument for playing. The song's title stole Subaru's attention from Liliana's speech. If the song was indeed the tale of what he thought it was, then the song about to be played was the touching tragic love story about a demon, a woman, and a sword. The songstress Liliana's act of terrorism ended with her song, and Subaru returned to the living room for an early breakfast. To be honest, the existence of the Sword Demon's Love Song had struck Subaru like an unexpected bolt of lightning. He should have realized long ago. No matter in which world, at any time, any heroic deeds would be preserved for future generations. They could be documented in a number of ways, such as in writing or paintings. It wasn't inconceivable that the heroine who had ended a civil war, and the sword demon who took that heroine as his wife were immortalized in song. Of course, even if Subaru was aware of this possibility, he couldn't have done anything about what happened this morning. He hadn't even known about the magic device, and he couldn't have known to tell Liliana to think about her actions. Now, he could only curse the songstress who'd chosen her song at the most inopportune time without any regard for the situation. His already poor impression of the songstress had somehow plummeted even further at her inexplicably poorly timed enthusiasm. Liliana was an idiot, Kiritaka was a fool. Subaru, has Wilhelm-san come here yet? The earliest to arrive in the living room were the previous occupants of the courtyard, with the exception of Felt, who had parted with them after leaving. She'd probably come later together with Reinhardt. Thinking of the song he'd just heard, recalling Wilhelm's thoughts on his wife and grandson, and picturing the old man's smile, Subaru was unable to suppress the feelings that sprung up in his chest. As for the words to say upon seeing him, Subaru had no idea how to find them. Even so, as long as there was communication, Subaru would be glad. Still, he seriously hoped that Wilhelm had somehow missed the song. Subaru, that group of overly serious people, it's impossible that all of them would be sleeping in on the same day. The three main members of Crush's faction, even Ferris, worked and rested on a balanced schedule. Even having lived with them only a few days, Subaru was well aware of this. On a journey to an unfamiliar place, they'd probably be nervous and maintain their schedule even more rigorously, so it was impossible that they would have missed the broadcast. Emilia, Subaru, you look awful, what's wrong? Emilia leveled her gaze at Subaru, who sat on a cushion, rapidly tapping his feet in anxiety. After the broadcast had ended, Subaru had immediately proposed that their faction should go to the tea room. After confirming that the tea room was empty, he claimed its undisturbed peace. Emilia and the others simply savored the tragic lyrics of the Sword Demon's Love Song and indulged in Liliana's voice. They were unaware that the Sword Demon in the song was Wilhelm, or of any of the origins of the Sword Demon. Therefore, Subaru was reluctant to have them share his anxiety. Even more frightening was that Liliana's song had even captured Subaru. Subaru, who'd been plagued with a sense of trepidation upon hearing the song's title, couldn't bring himself to leave courtyard while listening to it. Or rather, that kind of thought hadn't even surfaced. Liliana's singing had to have contained magic. Because of this, even after recovering, Subaru couldn't shake off a sense of anxiety when thinking of that hasty brunette. Subaru, it's nothing, just, I'm a little hungry, you see, even though the inn's food is delicious, isn't it a little lacking in quantity? My body wants me to pilfer snacks, so I can eat them and grow. Emilia, Subaru, I don't believe you. The usually gullible Emilia saw right through Subaru's bluff at this critical moment. Was he so easy to read? Subaru's confidence vanished. Otto, really, Natsuki-san. Although I don't know what you're anxious about, we're discussing our plans for the afternoon. You should be paying attention. Subaru, this afternoon's plan, oh yeah, the second negotiation with Kiritaka. We could take Liliana hostage, so we can exchange her with the magic stone we want? Otto, why in the world would you propose such a forceful plan? Otto, amazed by Subaru's words, raised his voice as his face adopted a gloomy expression. Seeing that, Subaru tilted his head with an eh. Perhaps it was due to his still burning the anger toward Liliana, but it probably wouldn't serve to raise the plan's success rate. Otto, in any case, this afternoon, will be attempting negotiations with Kiritaka-san again, and the one we should try to win the trust of is that member of the Scales of the White Dragon, who is the mostly likely to be able to persuade Kiritaka-san. Subaru, the Scales of the White Dragon, that's such a cool name. Was he at the meeting yesterday? Otto, yes, the Scales of the White Dragon is a well-known mercenary group in this area. Although they were established a long time ago, they were recently hired as a private force by Kiritaka-san. That man was their representative. Subaru, of the people who were there, he's probably the best person to talk to. While they hadn't been there to observe the room the negotiation had taken place in, Subaru had a vague recollection of the presence of a middle-aged man in white before the magic stone's light had engulfed him. Kiritaka was mad for Liliana, who was often in a state of madness herself. Subaru was certainly eager to talk to someone more rational than the two. Otto, judging by this morning's broadcast, Kiritaka-san's anger should have calmed down somewhat, and he should be willing to listen to us, but if Natsuki-san is going to be present, then he would mostly likely be significantly less reasonable. Subaru, I know my scary eyes put people off the first time they see me, but I didn't expect such an aggressive reaction. That kinda hurt. Emilia, that doesn't matter, Subaru. I don't dislike fierce-looking eyes. My mother also had very fierce eyes, but she was such a gentle person. Beatrice, Subaru's face isn't that bad, in fact, actually, I was mistaken, I suppose. Subaru, no comfort is preferable, actually. Don't make me face the truth. Subtle bore the gentle and stern words before urging Otto to continue. Otto went on saying so. Otto, during today's negotiations, I think Natsuki-san shouldn't accompany us. Is that okay? Subaru, no matter what, I don't have a choice but to agree, but if you succeed, then what's the point of my being here? Otto, between just Natsuki-san having come for nothing and all of us having come for nothing, we're choosing the smaller loss of just Natsuki-san, who only runs around playing with Beatrice-chan. Beatrice, I feel like you're underestimating Betty, in fact. It's annoying, I suppose. Beatrice's anger was dismissed and their plan of action was finalized. Nevertheless, Subaru had also considered what Otto was likely thinking. Subaru, this afternoon I'll go with Emilia to take a walk with Biko. Emilia? I won't be going to see Kiritaka-san with Otto-kun? Otto, they surely anticipated that we would likely come to negotiate again, and if we were to take Emilia-sama, we would be making an unannounced sudden visit, and we will fail just as we did yesterday. Natsuki-san, I'm glad you realize this, but I can't help but think that you're up to something. Otto glared Subaru, who responded with an innocent whistle. He had told Otto about meeting Liliana yesterday, but he'd neglected to mention where they'd met. Kiritaka had wanted to keep Emilia's faction from meeting Liliana, so he'd probably sent her out, and she'd chosen a nice scenic park to find refuge in. Subaru, I found a nice park, and I'd like Emilia to accompany me there. We could take stroll with Beatrice holding our hands between us. Emilia, wow, that sounds like fun. But, I wonder if it's okay for us to be relaxing like that. Well, Otto-kun? Otto, I can't refuse if you stare at me with those eyes. Well, Natsuki-san and Emilia-sama both can't go due to a variety of circumstances, so I'll go with Garfield. Please don't cause any trouble. In affirmation of Otto's words, Emilia and Subaru nodded earnestly. But Subaru also stuck his tongue out at Otto's back as an apology. Liliana would almost certainly not be present at the Muse Chamber of Commerce today. In that case, Subaru could only assume that she would go to the same park as yesterday. If she wasn't there, Subaru would accept that there was nothing he could do, but he still wanted to establish a relationship with her if he could. If Kiritaka truly loved Liliana from the bottom of his heart, there was quite a large possibility that he'd agree to a direct request from her. Of course, he couldn't just think of using Liliana. If he abused her good intentions, Emilia would oppose it, and Subaru's own conscience wouldn't let him walk free. Thus, Subaru decided to tell Liliana his story without any reservations. Subaru hoped that the result would be honest, even if it strayed from the heroic biography that she'd been expecting and disappointed her. Immortalized in history as a hero by a song. Just the thought gave Subaru goosebumps, but if he had to add fuel to the fire, he wanted to leave an honest impression. At the very least, Subaru's famed so-called heroic deeds would also be disillusioned when his audience learned of his miserable mistakes along the way. Anastasia, good morning. You're all up early. Just as Emilia's faction decided on their internal and external plans of action, the door of the tea room was opened, revealing the figure of Anastasia. Today's Anastasia wore her usual fox scarf coupled with a kimono. It was indeed a surprise to suddenly see a kimono, and Subaru was excited. Emilia's eyes gleamed for a different reason. She was delighted to see the clothing. Anastasia gazed at them with pride. Anastasia, very nice, very nice. I'm glad to be shocking people so early in the morning. Emilia, Anastasia-san, that dress is so beautiful. Is that what you were talking about yesterday? Anastasia, yep. This is the kimono I mentioned at bath yesterday. Although it looks a lot like a bathrobe, it takes a lot of preparation to wear. Anastasia turned delightedly, showing off her blue-dyed clothing, which was charmingly patterned with floating, scattered petals. Kararaji apparently shared much of Subaru's familiarity with Japanese culture. Subaru, that type of clothing, has it been handed down since the days of Hashin? Anastasia, well, you're quite knowledgeable, Natsuki-kun. This type of clothing did seem to appear more frequently since the beginning of the Hashin's era. Although, that method of production was lost, and only reproductions are currently made. Subaru, Hashin's era. This man, Hashin of the Wastelands, appeared once again. Now, Subaru had no choice but to suspect that Hashin, like Subaru and Al, had been summoned. Only, unlike Subaru and Al, Hashin had been from 400 years ago. Subaru, the priority is figuring the current situation out, but afterward I might want to take a good look at this Hashin. On the matter of his summoning, Subaru did not intend to start digging for knowledge at this point. Although he knew the structure of the summons, the purpose of the summoner was completely unknown. However, this call is just a one-way for him to come here. There was no such convenience that would allow him to go back home. On this matter, just considering it would be like fishing for the moon in a puddle, there was no solution. What Subaru wanted to know was what predecessors he had had, what kind of footprints they'd left in this world, and where they'd ended up. Nothing more. Reinhardt, good morning, Subaru. Did you sleep well last night? You were a great help in reminding Felt-sama to return to her room this morning. Felt, how annoying. It wasn't my intention to go back to there. After Anastasia, Reinhardt strode into the tea room with Felt in tow. He deposited her on a cushion, giving no indication of whether or not he'd heard the song that morning. He certainly must have known that the Sword Demon's love song was referring to his own grandfather. Reinhardt, Anastasia-sama, you look more beautiful with each passing morning. I had been a little concerned about your modesty, but now it seems unfounded. Anastasia, this is my treasured possession. I can't go into Pristella unless I prepare myself. On that note, I still have to show off to Julius. After that, Julius also joined them, and Anastasia showed off her garb to her knight. After she had received her due flattery, Anastasia tilted her head at him. Anastasia, didn't the others accompany you? Julius, Ricardo said he had something to do and went out to the city last night, but Mimi and her brothers, they seem to be follow Emilia faction's Garfield. Emilia, they're following Garfield? Emilia looked up when she heard the name of one of her servants. Julius nodded. Julius, Mimi found Garfield leaving the hotel and immediately gave chase. Then Hitaro went after her, and Tivy, who cleans up their messes, said that he'd handle it, so they all left Joshua. Anastasia descended upon Joshua with her hands on her hips, who hid behind the tall Julius. The handsome young man bowed his head to his master as he stepped forward timidly, looking extremely pale and concerned. Joshua, I am deeply, extremely sorry. I desperately tried to stop them, but Mimi and Hitaro weren't listening at all. Tivy said to please leave everything to him. Anastasia, well, if Tivy's there, they shouldn't cause any problems. Let's put it aside, we're the hosts, but we're making quite a spectacle of ourselves in front of our guests. Patiently patting the ashamed Joshua's shoulders in a sign of forgiveness, Anastasia turned to face everyone present with a gracious smile. She shook her supple hair, her fingers playing with her scarf. Anastasia, as you've just witnessed, this embarrassing fiasco is happening. I hope you'll excuse it. Our lovely deputy captain, seemingly distracted by her first love, is having a hard time fighting her impulses. Mimi was obsessed with Garfield and wanted to cling to his side. Everyone present could see this. Everyone, with two exceptions. Emilia had tilted her head in confusion and Joshua issued a sigh of so that's what it was. Subaru, by the way, Felt, I didn't see that Tonchinkan trio at all. Are they all staying here? Felt, you mean Gaston and the others? Well, having them living here would be a waste and a joke, and they're so unused to places like this that they'd feel awkward. They're living somewhere cheaper in the city, but... As she answered Subaru's question, Felt grinned. Felt, hey, that Tonchinkan nickname isn't bad, since their names are Gaston, Larkins, and Camberley. It's not confusing at all, and they don't seem to mind it. Subaru, I also think it's a great nickname. I want to praise the me from a year ago. When I first heard their real names, I'd thought a miracle had happened. The Tonchinkan trio was what they had started as, and the Tonchinkan trio was where they had ended up. Crush, we're late, it looks like we're the last ones here. Finally arriving in the tea room was Crush's faction. Today, she worked her long green hair up and fitting of her new self, wore a gorgeous ladylike floral hairpin. She took a brief walk into the room, followed by Ferris and Wilhelm, who was, as always, solemnly dressed, his back upright. Looking at the old man's posture, Subaru couldn't help but shake his shoulders. He swallowed, trying to steal a glance at the old man's face, and Wilhelm caught Subaru's gaze. Wilhelm. He showed a faint smile, giving a slight bow. Witnessing this action, Subaru received the message contained in the earlier smile: you don't have anything to worry about. Subaru's heart began to beat faster, until he saw Ferris, sitting at Crush's side, winking and giving a peace sign. No worries, we've taken care of it. That was the message Subaru received from Ferris. Perhaps Ferris noticed Subaru's attention. He ceased making his movements, and began to cling to Crush's side as he always did. Subaru was conscious of what it was like to be useless, and was afraid of appearing nosy. Crush and Ferris certainly knew more than Subaru about the connection between Wilhelm and those songs. They were more sensitive and had greater proximity with Wilhelm. That was natural, because they were his companions. Subaru didn't need to have worried. Subaru, better to say that it is our negligence that we couldn't help Garfield. This is not to say that he shouldn't care about others. Rather, it is better to first do something for your own faction, which would leave you free to help others. However, the turbulent depression in Garfield's body was something that could only be overcome by Garfield's own efforts, so that line of thought would solve nothing. Anastasia, well, there's still a few people who haven't shown up, but in all likelihood they won't be coming. Although the number of occupants was less than that of last night's attendees, the number was still impressive. After all, among what happened last night, eating itself was also very exciting. What to put on this morning? With a short pause of anticipation, Anastasia smiled and said, Anastasia, bring it in. At her orders, the hotel staff opened the door, and, immediately afterward, a large heated block of iron was carried in. Anastasia, today's treat is a traditional Karaji breakfast, the daisukiyaki pancake. Anastasia rolled her sleeves up slightly, raising her voice. In front of a silent crowd, the inn staff coated the iron with a layer of oil and carried in an assortment of ingredients one by one into the room. The daisukiyaki pancake, from the name, the iron plate, and the assortment of ingredients, Subaru saw something incredibly familiar. Something called Subaru, a Japanese, okonomiyaki. As something that had been passed down for generations, the Japanese okonomiyaki pancake arrived on stage. Emilia, Subaru, look at my masterpiece. Beatrice, Subaru, this is the best pancake made by Betty, I suppose. You can have it, in fact. Emilia smiled earnestly, and Biko's face was a little flushed. Each placed their best pancake in front of him. To Subaru, they were just charred blocks of black. The two, however, were completely unaware of their lack of skill. Subaru, try it yourself before you taste it. With this sensible suggestion, Subaru held back a look of pain as the two obediently started on their pancakes and turned his attention to the other factions. Reinhardt, finished, Felt-sama. Felt, oh, it's good, make me some more. I'm always grateful for your food, delicious cooking. Reinhardt, if you count on me for anything else, I'll be living up to my honor as a knight. This was Felt's faction. Reinhardt made pancakes at an impossible pace, and Felt gobbled them up just as fast. Hidden somewhere in Felt's slim figure was King of Stomachs. Or she was just gluttonous. Either way, she ate far more than her share. All in all, Reinhardt had yet to eat, while Felt had already polished off 10. By the way, Emilia's faction was faring awfully. As had just been demonstrated, Emilia and Beatrice didn't pull their weight, and the only useful members were Otto and Subaru. Otto, look, Emilia-sama and Beatrice-chan. Oh, eat this. Ah. Emilia-sama. Self-reflection is good, but don't eat them raw. Beatrice-chan, that's too much sauce. Of the other factions, the person that stood out the most was Anastasia. This was the surprise breakfast that she had planned herself. She had both a deep self-confidence and love for the daisukiyaki. Anastasia, watch carefully. This is the real daisukiyaki. She flipped the pancakes neatly and smoothly, and had put beautifully made pancakes onto Julius's plate. Julius, I am unworthy of eating Anastasia-sama's food, but I think they would be better if they were cooked for a shorter amount of time. Of course, I don't mean to bother Anastasia-sama. Anastasia, of course, they need to be less charred. Even though Julius is a man, he says so like a tender maiden. Unlike Subaru, who redirected his offerings and told his gifters to reflect on themselves, Julius not only ate the pancakes, but kept a straight face, and gave Anastasia pointers to improve. That person was a role model as a knight. Subaru absolutely didn't want to imitate him, and lacked the ability to do so anyway. Sitting at their side, eating sticky raw pancakes, was a pitiful-looking Joshua. His monocle seemed to be fogging over, preventing him from seeing properly, and he desperately tried to hide his struggle. He'd feel mortified if the Subaru whom he hated noticed this embarrassing spectacle, so he didn't greet him. After seeing the difference in elegance between the brothers, Subaru could only conclude that the most stable faction was Crush's. Ferris, oh Crush-sama, Fairy-chan made really beautiful pancakes, take a look. Crush, you certainly have, but I won't lose to you. Like a passionate competition between two women, Crush and Ferris conversed. Their confidence was supported by their results. The pancakes they'd made were perfect. Ferris had even added cat ears to his. Ferris, please enjoy my pancakes, they're filled with Fairy-chan's love. Crush-sama, open wide. Crush, hey, that, Although, the happy scene did feel a little off-putting. That may have been because Subaru knew they were man and woman, or because he knew of how Crush's temperament had changed after her memory loss. Anyway, master and servant appeared to have no problems. The last member of their faction, sitting next to the peach-colored space, and focusing on his own pancake was Wilhelm. Wilhelm, Wilhelm, who'd been trying to turn the dough over, closed his eyes and sighed. It seemed that his pancake had been torn apart after Wilhelm had left it on the iron for too long, causing it to stick. He'd unexpectedly seen Wilhelm's clumsy side. Subaru, I feel like I saw something I shouldn't have, but in that case. Feeling that he should help Wilhelm, Subaru climbed to his feet, then sat back down, reconsidering. Subaru, Wilhelm-san. Wilhelm, Subaru Dano? Hearing his name, Wilhelm lifted his head. Noticing that Subaru had seen his clumsiness, his brow furrowed in shame. Subaru gave him an encouraging nod, and gently pointed with his jaw. Wilhelm, who understood his meaning, swallowed quietly. Wilhelm. Moving to the place indicated by Subaru, Wilhelm took a seat next to Reinhardt. He obediently followed each of Felt's instructions, producing pancakes without halt and failing to notice the exchange between Subaru and Wilhelm. Although Subaru had already communicated everything he'd wanted to say to Wilhelm. Consternation, confusion, hesitation, doubt, all wavered in Wilhelm's eyes. He took a long time to reach a decision. Finally. Wilhelm, Reinhardt. Reinhardt. Reinhardt froze as Wilhelm forced himself to call his grandson's name. His spatula hovered in midair as his hand stopped moving, and Felt plated the pancake with a perfect catch. That act was inelegant, but Reinhardt took no notice of it. The red-haired youth faced Wilhelm with wide eyes. Wilhelm met his gaze head-on, without so much as drawing a breath. Wilhelm. Reinhardt. Abruptly, silence fell. Not just between the two, but also between the people around them who had noticed. The entire room stilled, and the only remaining sounds were those of spatulas meeting the iron. Time seemed to stagnate as everyone held their collective breaths. Wilhelm, that is. Reinhardt, what is it, honored grandfather? Wilhelm, I'm not so good at this, so if you know any kind of trick to make it easier, could you teach it me? Those were Wilhelm's clumsy, stuttering words. Only Crush, Ferris, and Subaru widened their eyes, understanding what kind of resolve Wilhelm had needed to choke those words out. Wilhelm himself seemed to sag with exhaustion after posing the question. Wordlessly, Reinhardt swallowed as he considered how to answer. His fair features stilled as an unfamiliar emotion washed over his blue eyes. Reinhardt closed his eyes and buried that emotion into a soft sigh. Then. Reinhardt, yes, I understand, honored grandfather. The corners of his mouth turned up as he closed his eyes. That expression could only be described as a smile. It wasn't the reassuring smile that he usually wore to give others a sense of security. This may have been the only time anyone had seen the young man named Reinhardt step out of his role as the Sword Saint and show a genuine smile. Wilhelm's dumbstruck expression slowly reclaimed its composure. He lowered his face, closing his eyes as if he were enduring something. He probably had difficulty processing that reaction immediately. However, the real genuine feeling was there. Once delivered, it only needed to be accepted. The long divide between the two, grandfather and grandson, could only be offset by a corresponding amount of time. Subaru, seeing such a possibility play out in front of him, clenched his fist with a plethora of emotions. From the bottom of his heart, he wanted to greet Wilhelm with joy. And it isn't so easy, honored father. Don't think that your relationship will be fixed with just that. Suddenly, a red-haired figure threw open the door of the tea room. The face of the red-haired man who'd spoken those words carried so much malice that everyone froze on the spot, forgetting the flow of time. Chapter 16, Uninvited Guests. That touching moment was spoiled in the worst way. The red-haired man's behavior and attitude all betrayed an ugly nature. A rather repulsive smile spread across his unshaven face. He looked to be in his 40s and carried the unpleasant scent of alcohol about him. Although his actions and appearance all evoked a sense of disgust which seemed to reflect his character, the man underneath the poor grooming was quite handsome. The beautiful characteristics their desired form are contaminated by completely different things. Something about the slender man's posture exuded an aura of repulsiveness. Subaru, who are you? Ah. The first to break the shocked silence that had fallen across the room was none other than Subaru, who reached behind him and gripped the handle of the weapon at his waist. Having lost his cool, Subaru's spinning head drove him to act impulsively. There was nothing that could have angered him more than the interruption of the reconciliation between the clumsy, awkward duo of grandfather and grandson. Only Subaru knew why he was in such a frenzied rage. It wasn't just a reconciliation between a friend and someone he respected that had been interrupted. It was reconciliation between family. The beginning of a family looking for a connection. To dare to treat it like that. Subaru, answer me. Who the hell are you? You're really casting a hostile look at me, kid. As a knight, you do know who you're trying to provoke, right? Subaru, don't make me laugh, mister. The one being provocative is you. I'm just asking you exactly what you're doing here. His patience reaching a breaking point, Subaru stood from the banquet. Beatrice, who was sitting next to him, saw the feelings fueling his reaction and shifted her position so that she could take his hand at any time. His reliable partner had accurately sensed flames of anger residing in Subaru's heart. Glancing at Subaru with an unpleasant expression, the man scratched his head with a rude gesture. You're so annoying, kid. Hey, Sword Saint. Or Jacolius too, or even Argyle. Cut down this rude kid for me. Subaru, HK. With the hand he'd been scratching his head with pointing at Subaru, the insolent man casually gave an order to 3 people in the hall, Reinhardt among them. Seeing that humiliation to his comrades, Subaru wanted to strike at that grin with his whip. Julius, please watch your words. But he was interrupted by Julius's words before he could move. Julius, who had stood up at some point, gently placed a hand on Subaru's shoulder from behind. Julius nodded slightly at the frozen Subaru, then turned to face the man. Julius. Ferris is present, and Reinhardt as well. We 3 are on temporary leave from our normal duties due to serving our specific masters. Therefore, even the deputy head should not hold the right to command us. Ferris, yep. Ferry-chan is now an obedient servant to the venerable Crush-sama. Therefore, I have no obligation to comply with the order. Keeping his sitting posture, Ferris held Crush's arm as he offered an immediate follow-up to Julius's words. Although Crush, whose arm had just been taken, appeared a little surprised, she still filled her eyes with her strong will as she turned toward the red-haired man. The expression on everyone else's faces were similar, no one hid their hostility toward the man. That was natural, they had just shared a pleasant atmosphere, which had been torn apart by the man. However. Oh, how scary. Is it not obvious that I was just kidding around? It's not like I don't know the gravity of my orders as the deputy commander. Subaru, the deputy commander? The alcoholic man seemed to find something funny, slapping his legs in laughter at Julius and Ferris's reactions. During their exchange, a word slipped past to Subaru. After hearing his testimony, the man once again leveled his gaze in Subaru's direction. Just so. That's my delectable adornment. Deputy Commander of the Knights of the Kingdom of Lugunica, Heinkel, that's me. Subaru, don't give me such a righteous look. Heinkel, ha ha ha, this kid's voice is really harsh. It hurts me, so shut your worthless mouth, you dog. Subaru, HK. The darkness twinkling in the man's narrowed eyes sent a shuddering chill down Subaru's back. It was different from the overwhelming presence of something like the white whale or a witch. It was something more unspeakable. That something was familiar to Subaru, and yet it was impossible to recall exactly what it was. There was nowhere to escape that sense, and Subaru felt a ringing in his ears. Julius, calm down, Subaru. Don't let the deputy commander's atmosphere swallow you. Julius, who stood by his side, spoke to the dizzy Subaru. Hearing him, that man Heinkel faced Julius with a dark smile. Heinkel, ha! A worthy reply. An exemplary, polite answer. To show that respect as a knight, you truly are the knight of knights. Julius, allow me to accept the compliment, Deputy Commander Heinkel. If I may ask, what is the reason for your visit? If my memory serves correctly, your duty as Deputy Commander should be guarding the capital. Heinkel, drop those sarcastic words. Just how great of an influence on the vigilant defense of the capital can the absence of one man make? Marcus-sama can handle it perfectly alone, far better than I could, although, a royal family who could suffer disaster is missing. Wilhelm, Heinkel. Considering his position, Heinkel's speech was incredibly disrespectful. Upon hearing it, Wilhelm roared his name in fury. The sword demon, shaking with anger, directed a sharp glare at Heinkel, who merely shrugged his shoulders. Wilhelm, Heinkel. Heinkel, just calling me once is fine. I've yet to lose my hearing from old age. Well, treat that as nonsense and ignore it. More importantly. Heinkel responded to Wilhelm's bitter voice by sticking a finger into his ear as he closed his blue eyes. Then, he opened them to look at Wilhelm. Heinkel, this isn't a very nice feeling. Obviously, I want to offer my congratulations to you for your defeat of the white whale, but you've been avoiding me. This is a feat that took 14 long years to accomplish, after all. I'd think that I also have the right to join the joyful celebrations. Isn't that the case, father? Wilhelm, Heinkel, Heinkel, Reinhardt, what about you? Reinhardt. Heinkel viciously stabbed his words into Wilhelm's chest. Although the old man's face showed the pain of being cut by a blade, Heinkel showed no sign of caring. Instead, he directed his malice at a new target. Reinhardt, who had silently observed the situation until just now, slowly looked toward Heinkel when he heard his name. Heinkel, shouldn't you also be congratulating father on the burden that's been lifted off of his shoulders? Since he's carried out a wife, a mother, a grandmother's vengeance. At least offer him some nice words. That said. Reinhardt. Heinkel, with this, father has finally avenged the previous sword saint who you'd murdered, isn't that right? Subaru withdrew his original assertion. Saying that Heinkel wore a malicious look on his face was a mistake. Rather, he was the face of malice itself. Heinkel's words, expression, attitude, tone, behavior and gaze, all of these were manifestations of his intent, one that could only be described by the term malice. Indeed, every bit of Heinkel's demeanor contained nothing but pure malice. Subaru, previous sword saint, murdered. Subaru quietly blurted out those impressionable words. In his consciousness, there were other questions swimming about, but Subaru could not reasonably sort through them. However, malice would always spring on such an opportunity. Heinkel. Yeah, the murdered previous sword saint. Although I don't know exactly how ignorant you are, you have to be familiar with the title of sword saint, right? Our current sword saint is the most powerful hero of our day, but that was something he got from murdering his predecessor, his own grandmother. Although that fact was immediately hidden from public knowledge. Wilhelm, silence, Heinkel. You, just how far are you intending to go? Heinkel, if you want to say something that sounds nice, then please stop, father. The reason is nothing other than that you simply don't have the right to disagree with me. After all, when the last sword saint died, the first to condemn Reinhardt was none other than you. Wilhelm, H.K. Heinkel's words contained a dense, noxious poison of abhorrence. And the contents of his speech were no more than vulgar curses. Reinhardt had murdered his predecessor? Inconceivable. Wilhelm had bitterly condemned that Reinhardt? Inconceivable. After all, to Reinhardt, his predecessor had been. And to Wilhelm, Reinhardt was. So obviously, that couldn't have been possible. Reinhardt and Wilhelm. Neither Reinhardt nor Wilhelm would deny it. Why? If either of them would deny it, would even say a simple no, then Subaru would instantly believe it. A comrade and a beloved mentor. A malicious man covered with the scent of alcohol. There was absolutely no question as to who Subaru would believe. Therefore, he wanted one of them to deny those words. Heinkel, is it hard to communicate now? Of course it is. It's been this way for 14 years. Neither you nor my father have changed at all. Without change, it's impossible for you to reconcile. Would Theoresia van Astrea forgive such a selfish affair? In silence, only Heinkel's profane words echoed. The previous sword saint. She had been Wilhelm's wife, as well as Reinhardt's grandmother. And to Heinkel. Heinkel, my dead mother is cursing us. 3 generations, and none of us have been forgiven. Reinhardt's father. Wilhelm's son. Considering Heinkel's words and deeds, Subaru correctly deduced his origin. Subaru, Heinkel van Astrea. Testing the name out, he found that it echoed with an air of rightness. The man in front of him was undoubtedly attached to the Astrea family. Even if his nature as a human was completely different from the upstanding Astreas that Subaru knew. Heinkel, don't attach the van to my name, kid. I haven't been given that honor. It's just Heinkel Astrea. Subaru. Hearing Subaru's questioning breath, Heinkel clicked his tongue and looked away. For the first time since arriving here, bitterness flashed over his half-visible face. His eyes, which had contained only sadistic glee as he'd insulted his family, seemed to carry a look of pain. As soon as he'd begun to ponder what had happened, Subaru was interrupted. Emilia, so, what did you come here for? Subaru, Emilia? Everyone had been shuddering at Heinkel's unforgivable attitude. However, it was Emilia who first stood up and questioned him. Her silver hair floating behind her, she stood next to Subaru, who could feel a wave of anger emanating from her. To Emilia, not feeling anger over the ruined atmosphere of or such an impolite manner was impossible. She only ever became seriously angry when the situation concerned the feelings of others. And even she was aware of how Reinhardt and Wilhelm had been hurt. Emilia, we were originally dining happily. To deliberately spoil such a peaceful moment, what exactly did you intend? Heinkel, oh, this is unexpected. Are you not Emilia-sama? I've heard the rumors. A poor half-witch girl who stands no fighting chance but struggles along anyway. Emilia, although I'd like to one day talk to you and ask how you think of me, right now I only want to hear one answer from you. Why did you come here? Heinkel. Was he attempting to throw Emilia off with insults? Subaru saw through him, and the surprised Heinkel felt disappointed. The members of the other factions also seemed surprised at Emilia's calm demeanor. It was a surprising difference from the innocence Emilia had shown yesterday. To say that she was pretending to be innocent would be a lie, however. This was Emilia being true to herself. Emilia, the reason why we all gathered here was because we were invited by Anastasia-san. It's very rare that we are all gathered in the same place, so I don't think you would have randomly targeted such an opportunity, even if you are someone important to the Knights. Please tell me exactly what you want. Heinkel, TCH. Not the same as the rumors. Emilia, answer me. Heinkel, who had been again scratching his head, was shaken by Emilia's momentum. Although Emilia was angry, she was by no means preparing an attack. The pressure emanating from her had nothing to do with magic. It was merely the strength of her feelings. Felt, you marched in with confidence just to back down when a girl glares at you. Mister, that's pretty embarrassing. Anastasia, that's right. Just when I was looking forward to sharing a fun story too. Songstress-san is apparently quite the whimsical character, isn't that interesting? Crush, well, is that so? Then, I'd appreciate it if this puzzling man would leave, since I'd love to discuss these rumors about Songstress-san with everyone here. Heinkel, HK. Following Emilia, Felt, Anastasia, and Crush spoke up as well. Like Emilia, the three joined their domineering forces in opposition to Heinkel. Facing the pressure of all four of them, Heinkel's face couldn't help but twitch. They were on completely different levels. Considering his title, his position was rather lacking. Julius, I'm sorry, Deputy Head. If there's nothing else for time being, then I think, for the benefit of all parties involved, that you should take your leave. Heinkel's reaction, and the attitude of the royal candidates. Julius calculated that this would be the right time to bail Heinkel out. Subaru would have preferred to crush Heinkel on the spot, but changed his mind after seeing Reinhardt and Wilhelm. He didn't fully grasp the situation, and so he couldn't make hasty judgments. Heinkel, Gore. Julius, Deputy Commander. Please make a decision. Once you do, please. There's no need for that, Commoner. That voice shined with self-assurance. The owner of that confident voice, which could shake the will of its listeners, seemed able to impose their own superiority wherever they went. Capable of dismissing common sense and establishing a new set of rules, ones which allowed no protest or objection. All of the members of the tea room looked at the sliding door near Heinkel. Everyone was fully aware that someone was about to stride in from the corridor. Heinkel had long since ceased to exist in anyone's mind. The sun's burning scowl lit the corridor. So, all of the trivial people have arrived? You've prepared a stage for mine debut. You deserve praise for your behavior. A boldly exposed chest hugged by a blood-red dress, a mouth coquettishly covered by a fan. Her arms were crossed under her ample chest, pushing it up in the glamorous act of showing off her white skin without reservation. Her bright red eyes resembling the licks of a flame, an enchantment capable of mesmerizing all the men in the world. Even seeing her once would scorch her violent beauty into one's memory forever. Excessive beauty will become violent. Her existence proved this. A teenaged girl named Priscilla Bariel. The uninvited fifth candidate of the royal election. Priscilla, so is this it? Frozen faces in a lifeless environment. Do you like this stale air so much? Or is it that every time we meet, such an atmosphere forms? If so, that's incredibly pitiful. Priscilla frowned as she looked throughout the room and spoke in a provocative tone while fanning her face. Due to her abrupt debut, no one was able to rebut her insults. Priscilla, what a poor reception. I deliberately graced this place with mine presence. Placing your forehead on the floor and treating me with admiration and praise is what the correct reaction would be. Subaru, that's how people would treat a deity. It wouldn't happen unless you actually become the king. Priscilla, Subaru couldn't help but comment on Priscilla's arrogance. Hearing his mutter, Priscilla turned to look at him, trapping Subaru with her bright gaze. Subaru, what? Priscilla, who are you? I had heard that this would be a gathering of fools who know not their place, and would compete for the throne. Of course, they would also bring fools who support them. But why is a vulgar commoner like yourself present? Subaru, are you for real? Subaru was halted by the hostility facing him. Priscilla's words were neither joking nor mocking. That is to say, she was being genuine. Priscilla had honestly completely forgotten about Subaru's existence. Although they'd gone for a year without seeing each other, Subaru's idiocy in the capital shouldn't have been so easily forgotten. Although it would be correct to say that this was a very Priscilla-like attitude, it wasn't an attitude that was particularly appreciated. Princess, that's a bit much, isn't it? Although I don't know how much he's worth to you, to me he's almost like a brother. He's a very interesting opponent, yeah? A thin voice cut across the heavy atmosphere. That voice was a little hesitant, and was accompanied by the sound of metal. A man with a single arm spoke soothing words as he entered from the corridor to join Priscilla's side. His face was entirely covered by a helmet, and his solid, broad physique gave the impression that he was a strong man. He was both a servant to Priscilla and, like Subaru, a summoned man from another world. And of course, he had accompanied his master here. He inserted himself between Priscilla and Subaru. Al, hey, you remember, right? It'd be hard to forget when a guy appears in the castle, and does something dumb to embarrass himself in front of so many people. This is that guy. Princess even clutched her stomach when she had a good laugh about it. Priscilla, I've no impression whatsoever. By the way, Al. I would never laugh so hard that I'd need to clutch mine stomach. Do not belittle such an honorable presence as a casual commoner. Even though it's you, I won't be tolerant next time. I'll cut off your head. Al, you see, brother? Sorry I couldn't do anything. Maybe if you work hard to become better. Subaru, give me a little more credit for the things I've done in the past year. Al soon gave up trying to jog his master's memory, and instead turned to apologize to Subaru, his head bowed in apology. Subaru sighed, feeling like Al hadn't changed at all this past year. Although, for the middle-aged Al, undergoing a noticeable change would be fairly impossible. Heinkel, you're a little late, Priscilla-sama. How long were you going to make me act alone? I'd heard that you were supposed to be coming earlier. Priscilla, silence, commoner. You will dance as ordered to. Until I give the order to stop, you are expected to dance until you die. Those who misunderstand their duties or attempt to correct a mistake they believe I made are condemned to death. Heinkel, On the other hand, Heinkel, realizing that the atmosphere in the room had changed, immediately turned to Priscilla, who was standing behind him. However, any type of argumentative attitude taken toward Priscilla would be entirely futile. Although Heinkel was embarrassed by the uncompromising Priscilla, Subaru raised his gaze after listening to their conversation. Subaru, Priscilla. Did you bring that guy? Priscilla, listen, commoner. Just who allowed you to dare to speak to me without the proper honorific? Even the compassionate and generous I, when faced with such a helpless person, have a limit to my patience. Al, princess. Al called briefly to her as he saw the brutal look lodged in her eyes as she glared at Subaru. Then, Priscilla closed one eye and gave a slight breath. Priscilla, I don't know why, but my servant seems to have taken a liking to you. Al, who spared your life, no, there is no need to thank Al, worship mine forgiveness. If you do so, I'll spare you. Subaru, thanks for your generosity and consideration. Then, the answer to my question is. Priscilla, if you're thinking that I brought this commoner here, then you would be correct. He is present at mine calling. Subaru, for what? Subaru raised his voice at the assertive Priscilla and questioned her purpose. Uninvited guests upon uninvited guests had arrived. What kind of a plot was brewing here, Subaru needed to know. However, in the face of Subaru's question, Priscilla merely tilted her head and... Priscilla, perhaps because I thought that it would make an interesting sight. Subaru, an interesting sight? Priscilla, that's right. Distorted family disputes, or the joy and sadness that comes from relationships. Such ugly performances are so very exciting. In fact, do you see? The Sword Saint and the Sword Demon acted rather human. Such a sight is very rare. Subaru, Priscilla. That twisted, crooked perspective enraged Subaru. As Priscilla said, Reinhardt's family dispute was hardly seen. And that sea of bitterness was hardly something that needed to be known. If Heinkel hadn't appeared, such a dark history would never have come to light. Even so, the grandfather and grandson had been trying to restore their relationship. To have torn that. Al, stop, brother. There's no meaning to a fight happening here. Princess's poor character isn't a thing that's been here for a day or two. Just think of it as bad luck, as bad stars, and try to let it go. Subaru, if you know your master has a poor character, then you should be trying to lead her onto the right path. Just indulging her is irresponsible. Al reached for Subaru with his single arm, slowly shaking his head. Since his hand was grabbing Subaru's wrist, if anything happened, he wouldn't be able to draw his sword on such short notice. In other words, he was indicating that he had no wish whatsoever to fight. Noticing this, Subaru took a long breath. He looked around and found that he was the only one who had acted on his impulsive anger. Outsiders aside, even Julius and Ferris didn't want to start anything. Of course. This was a gathering for the throne candidates. No one wanted to entertain the possibility of anyone getting hurt here. Subaru, but even in this case, no matter how much their hearts suffer. Emilia, Subaru. Emilia's wavering eyes called to Subaru, who had been submerged in his fury. Feeling a tug on his sleeve, Subaru also knew that Beatrice was granting him her support. Feeling the support of the two, Subaru was unable to bow his head. Anastasia, the vicious hound's fury seems to have subsided. I'm wondering something, even though I didn't send you an invite, how did you come to learn of this meeting? Priscilla seemed ready to take her leave and carry on her agenda. However, Anastasia took an opportunity to halt her. Although Anastasia's tone was soft, she was quite alert. Anastasia, after all, a child running their mouth shouldn't be allowed to run free. Priscilla, don't talk to me with that affectation, mine ears are decaying. I am more than capable of keeping up with a quick-thinking fox. Anastasia, oh my. Could it be that you're neglecting to mock me as a commoner? Priscilla, if you haven't seen what you should have, then that level of ignorance places you in the same category as all of those other fools. Could it be that you are foolish enough as to want me to overlook you? The two were engaged in a battle of words. However, Priscilla may or may not have been deliberately provoking Anastasia's natural business-focused rhetoric. Anastasia leisurely caressed the scarf on her neck. Anastasia, leaked information is quite worrying, you know. Priscilla, anything that reaches someone else's ear has been leaked from a mouth lacking caution. And the more that's learned, the more holes that can be found. You're not the only one who observes and listens to others. It's just that kind of thing. Anastasia, but you see, I thought of you as someone who wouldn't engage in espionage to deal with the likes of us. Priscilla, a flying insect buzzes near mine ear. But what can I do without knowing its location? I would have to catch the insect using my eyes and ears, which is precisely what I have done. Of course, the same holds true for you. Priscilla's implication was that, similarly to dealing with flying insects, there was no need to miss any little piece of information. Subaru held the same opinion with Anastasia. It was inconceivable that Priscilla had actually adopted the appropriate tactics and put them into practice against her enemy factions. And the result of that negligence brought about the awful conditions today. Felt, that Mr. is Reinhardt's father, yeah? Ignoring the conversation so far, a frivolous voice shifted the topic. Her gaze sweeping across the room, the still eating Felt, her mouth soiled with sauces, she found Priscilla's gaze. Felt, after all, I've had some experiences at the capital, so I caught what was going on from the conversation. I'm not really interested in this guy's family relations. Only, if Reinhardt and the Mr. are together, that's different. Priscilla, ho. If it isn't the little girl from the ghetto. Felt, although I don't really care about him, I'm not unrelated to him. House Astria's lands are in fact a lifeline for us. Except this guy hasn't actually given Reinhardt the lands. The power of the family is still in the hands of that Mr. Next to Felt, Reinhardt's cheek stiffened slightly. Subaru caught on to Felt's concern. As an orphan, Felt had nothing to her name, and was currently using Reinhardt's lands as her base, where, bit by bit, she accumulated support. However, those lands were not Felt's own. They were the assets of the Astria family, and were on loan to her. However, those weren't Reinhardt's own territories. Even he had borrowed them. Heinkel, heh. Looks like you've finally realized the seriousness of the situation, idiot. Interjecting in their conversation was Heinkel, who wore an expression of pride and laughed with an, as I expected. He looked as if he had been waiting for the topic to return to Reinhardt and Felt. Heinkel, that's it. The head of the Astria family is still me. I haven't passed the position on to Reinhardt, nor do I intend to pass it to him. After all, the cumbersome affairs of politics shouldn't burden our busy sword saint. Felt, as family head, you should be ashamed. When we went to the Astria territories, only a handful of civil servants and maids with bloodshot eyes were maintaining it. Now that we've been restoring it, you actually dare to return to rule it? Heinkel, even if only in name, even if I'm irresponsible, the crown of family head is still mine. What's more, haven't my lands begun to improve? The people should be crying out in support of their lord now. I'm so loved by my people, I'm moved to the point of tears. Heinkel relentlessly mocked Felt, who tried to swallow her rage. At those vile and poisonous words, Subaru's vision turned white with rage. The room was filled with anger at the disgusting sight. It was clear now. This man was completely abnormal. Heinkel, your sense of crisis is right, Reinhardt's master. The Astria territories are mine. However, I'll never support you. You can clearly see who I'm supporting. Heinkel stood as if on a stage, expecting applause. He gestured toward Priscilla, a clear declaration that he would support a different candidate than his son and father. Heinkel, I've heard about your achievements in the past year, in the place of me, the Lord. In addition to agreeing that is a great achievement, I will also say it is time for you to take your leave of them now. If you understand it, hurry and hand it to me. Priscilla, hey, commoner. Heinkel, what is it, Priscilla-sama? I'm doing something very important right now. Priscilla, shut up. The ensuing violence had to be seen to be believed. Shortly after she'd finished speaking, Priscilla thrust her fan at Heinkel, who had widened his eyes. Following the unfolding fan was a terrifying gust that slammed Heinkel's slender body toward the ground with powerful momentum. Heinkel's eyes rolled back in his head, having lost his consciousness after the impact. But Priscilla's attack went one step further. She kicked him into the air with a swipe of her foot, and swiftly reached her hand up to meet his body. Princess, end your anger here. Otherwise, he's going to die. Priscilla. Priscilla was stopped before she could deliver the final blow with her arm by Al, who had predicted her outrage. Priscilla then turned to her helmeted servant. A crimson sword had appeared in her grabbed wrist. It had a Western-style curve and narrow blade, but it was engraved with wave-like flames. Even at a glance, it was an unusual sword, having instantly materialized in, and disappearing from, Priscilla's hand. Witnessing that, Al slowly released Priscilla's wrist. Al, really, spare me. You even drew your young sword, that's really not good for my hirtia. Priscilla, that was very rude, Al. From whom did you receive permission to dare to touch mine flawless skin? You won my favor on a whim, so to defile mine body is a mere dream which lies at the end of a dream. Priscilla forcefully slapped her freed hand on Al's stomach. She exhaled loudly from her nose, then looked down at the pitiful Heinkel who was writhing on the ground. After witnessing the brutal look in his eyes, he certainly deserved this. However, what Al said was also true. Priscilla, however, there is some truth to what you said. It would be excessive to kill him. Al, if you think so, then I hope you'll be more gentle with me in the future, Ga. Priscilla, quiet. I am not a demon. I will allow you to lick mine feet later as a reward. Al, don't put it like I get turned on by that. It'll lead to misunderstandings. Al, who had fallen to his knees after receiving a blow, desperately defended himself, but did not receive Priscilla's attention. She gazed at Heinkel with her blood-red eyes, having calmed down for the time being, and snapped her fingers. Priscilla, Schultz. Move the commoner out of here. Although dull, he is seemingly a worthwhile recruit. Considering what that took, giving him up would be a shame. Schultz, yes, Priscilla-sama. In response to her call, another figure emerged from the hall. It appeared that a child who was many years from being fully grown had been waiting in the corridor. He had pink fluffy curls, a slim, feminine figure, a fair face, and a high voice which indicated that he had yet to reach puberty. Seeing an undeveloped child dressed in a butler's uniform felt unethical. A young boy who, if going solely by appearances, looked to be around Beatrice's age. Schultz, I apologize, Heinkel-sama. To the unconscious Heinkel, Schultz took Heinkel's feet and began to struggle to pull him outside. Of course, it was very unreasonable to expect a child to carry Heinkel out. However, Schultz made no complaint about Priscilla's order, and at the same time he treated Heinkel with an attitude of respect. Al, Schultz-Kuhn always tries to be brave and strong, no matter what kind of an order he receives. Princess needs to remember to praise him later. Priscilla, that's only natural. He is under mine employ and serves me wholeheartedly. That undefined status isn't simply a foolish and reckless loyalty. Later, I'll allow him to lick mine feet. Al, Schultz-Kuhn wouldn't realize that you're joking and would tearfully do exactly as you request. Please give him a more normal reward. Priscilla, Then perhaps I'll give him the honor of being held by mine body as I sleep. Al, well, that shouldn't be a problem. But now I want to take his place. That was the listless dialogue between Priscilla and Al as they watched Schultz and Heinkel leave. Finally, all of the outsiders had been removed. Now, only the members of the royal elections factions remained. Felt, so, what's going to happen with that guy? You seriously want to drive us away from the Istria territory to weaken us? Priscilla, you do not have to treat that commoner's words with such gravity. Weren't you responsible for the revitalization of that territory? If the Lord returns to his house intending to drive you away, then who will follow him? Although the people are foolish and ignorant, they are not heartless fools who forget their grace. If you make a large wave, a correspondingly large wave will return to you. He won't be able to summon any waves. Felt, then, why was that guy invited? Priscilla, it's already been said, hasn't it? I found the situation interesting. Sooner or later, all I want will be in mine hands. That is an established fact. In that case, only mine route will vary. And that route is precisely decided by me. To the end, I brought him in as a toy to kill time. No matter what happens, the outcome cannot be changed. The absolute confidence Priscilla held transcended common sense and unreasonably imposed her will upon the world. The only way to deal with it would be to give up and bow down, or to fight it with a similar attitude. And so, candidates. Here, 4 candidates met her gaze without hesitation in an expression of confrontation. Except those glares, Priscilla gave a hearty, delighted laugh. Priscilla, excellent. The outcome has been decided, but mine journey will naturally have its share of happy excitement. Mine self has decided that you are all a cut above the commoners. And, once you have become worthy of being mine opponent, then, mine self will of course welcome you with my full capabilities. You are not yet worthy of being my enemies, was the judgment Priscilla had just made. No, she had said so long ago. She still treated Emilia as an insect. She didn't think of them as enemies at all. Then. Felt, I'll be sure to make you cry and regret that arrogance. Felt's declaration was exactly the will of all the occupants of the room. Chapter 17, that ever-present armor. Fully recovering the meal's original atmosphere was now impossible. After hearing Felt's sharp words, a satisfied Priscilla had left the hotel with Al in tow. It could probably be said that she was delighted at having achieved all of her goals there. Considering the damage she'd wrought, she really was selfish. Everyone had soon returned to their meals, unable to chat as happily as they had before. The impact she'd left was incredibly hurtful to everyone present. In particular, the feelings of both Reinhardt and Wilhelm must have been unimaginable to outsiders. Even so, the fortitude of those 2 men was strong enough that neither would allow any of their anxiety to show in their expressions. Of course, the imminent reconciliation of grandfather and grandson could only be postponed. Just that was enough for a hard knot to take root in Subaru's heart. Otto, we're incredibly lucky that Garfield wasn't present. Those were the words left by Otto as he departed for the Muse Chamber of Commerce following the meal. As he'd said, it would have been a serious matter if Garfield or someone else who was prone to rage had been at the meal. It wasn't difficult to imagine Garfield flying at Heinkel in a rage and causing a violent tragedy. Everyone at the breakfast had, for the most part, calm and rational natures. Maybe Priscilla had even factored that into her satisfaction. Subaru, how could that be? That's really a coincidence among coincidences. The luck which Priscilla arrogantly prided herself on was next to impossible. It had only brought them the worst of results. Although irrefutable, it was painful to admit. Emilia and Beatrice's worry surely hurt more than any indignation Subaru had felt. Even Felt had been acting reasonably, leaving Subaru the only one who let his emotions get the better of him. To both foe and friend, Subaru wanted to give apologies for his lack of consideration. Emilia and Beatrice had returned to their rooms for a short break before accompanying Subaru on their walk. Subaru took the time to try to walk off his frustration, his footsteps harder than usual. The inside of his shoe pressing against his foot felt rather like a reflection of his frustration. Landing on that train of thought, Subaru began to apply more and more pressure in his steps, trying to relieve his feelings until... Julius, don't step so hard on the floor, Subaru. You'll cause trouble for inn staff. Subaru, who had been gazing down at his feet, turned his head toward the sound. He had apparently unknowingly walked into the corridor facing the courtyard. Standing in the courtyard was Julius, who was bathing in the wind. His hand swept his purple hair back in a practiced gesture, and it withstood the cool breeze with a dramatic image. Julius's handsome face, as always, inspired envy in Subaru, who clicked his tongue at the other young man before taking a seat next to him in the corridor. Julius, Emilia-sama and Beatrice-sama are not with you, correct? Subaru, that'd be the case. Neither of them are children. They're at the age when they want some me time, and I have the delicacy to respect that right. I've set up a time and place for a date later. Julius, although I'm unfamiliar with some of the phrases you've used, it seems that even you have learned to better understand the thoughts of others. Subaru, ugh you. In a breach of convention, Julius was the one who spoke the first instigatory words of a quarrel. However, after seeing Julius's expression, Subaru's annoyance dissipated. Julius shook his head slightly. Julius, apologies. If you were truly one who was incapable of being considerate of others, you wouldn't have been able to so loudly denounce the deputy commander in front of everyone. I should offer you my gratitude. Subaru, that sounds like a thanks, so please don't give me one. That guy just rubbed me the wrong way. Compared to everyone else who maintained their cool, I must have looked awful. Julius, no such thing happened. It was precisely because of your rash manner that others could calm down, even myself included. Your impulsive reactions were helpful, it seems. Subaru, you weren't planning to praise me from the start, were you? Subaru frowned at Julius's genuine tone. Julius was always subtly taunting when he spoke to Subaru, although it came from both sides, so Julius wasn't solely at fault. In any case, it was nigh impossible for the two to speak to each other honestly. Subaru, I know. I should be more calm and collected to be like a knight. Even holding the position of knight, I still can't consciously keep a cool head, even though all would be outlined in a schoolboy's book of manners. Julius, that's right. Indeed, from a knightly perspective, your behavior was by no means commendable. However, facing the uncomfortable Subaru, Julius fell silent. His next action led Subaru's eyes to widen in surprise. Subaru, what are you doing? Julius, it's as you can see. Subaru, all I can see is you bowing at me. Julius bent down and inclined his head to Subaru. This was not a knight's courtesy. Nor was it a ceremonious ritual. There was no formal inspiration of his motion at all. This was completely unlike Julius. Julius, thanks. Thank you. Thank you for showing the indignation that I could not. Subaru, I have utterly no idea what you're talking about. Julius, valuing a knight's honor means that, no matter the occasion, you must act with virtue. Even if your own friend is being disdained, even if your own friend is treated with inhumane words, you cannot indulge in behaving according to your own feelings. But you are not like that. Maintaining his posture, Julius repeatedly gave Subaru his share of thanks. Subaru could only feel puzzled at the unexpected reaction. Julius, caught between my knighthood and my emotions, I quickly repressed my anger. However, seeing your passionate rebuttals, I felt ashamed of myself. So I want to thank you. Subaru, instead of venting your anger, Julius. Subaru uttered a sound of understanding, and Julius finally looked up. With just one sentence, Julius had finally revealed his genuine feelings, which were reflected in his gaze. Seeing him, Subaru could only give him a snarl. Subaru, what a stupid thing to say. Really, stop kidding around. Julius, stop kidding around, Subaru, of course. Why should I be angry in your place? I was angry purely because I'd personally been ticked off, not because there was someone else who wanted to snap at that bearded guy. I could never do something as clever as express someone else's anger. As if misunderstanding the matter, Subaru spoke these genuine thoughts to Julius. Subaru didn't consider his anger some kind of noble indignation. After all, only Reinhardt and Wilhelm could understand their own feelings. Subaru was an outsider who had simply been angry that such an atmosphere had been defiled. His anger was purely for his own sake. Subaru, if you were angry, why didn't you say something? I couldn't have calmly dealt with the old man alone, but if you'd been backing me up then we might have phased him. Julius, no matter what, he's still the deputy commander of the Knights. It'd be fairly troublesome if I made an enemy of a commanding officer. Subaru, this doesn't have to do with your rank. Not to mention, you just blurted no matter what, don't be so narrow-minded. You're constantly thinking about behaving like a knight, or acting with a knight's demeanor, or whatever. Is even your heart coated in a knight's armor? Julius. Facing a silent Julius, Subaru rested his elbows on his knees, and with his cheeks in his palms, gave an exaggerated sigh. What a stupid quarrel. Subaru had not only rejected Julius's gratitude, but had also been enraged by him. Thinking of the cause of the incident, including Heinkel, made him more angry. Julius, even my heart is coated in a knight's armor, that's pretty harsh. Subaru, although I think my wording was pretty artistic, just ignore it. I was only kidding. Julius, no, I'll keep it in mind. I'm glad that I'm learning a lesson from you. This is something that I never would have thought possible a year ago. Subaru, that uncomfortable stuff might be over with, but I still have nightmares about it. He still sometimes had dreams set in the Knight's training field, about his confrontation with Julius and his subsequent brutal beating. Although the physical suffering he'd experienced at the time was painful to recall, what he'd gone through mentally and emotionally hurt far more to remember. The memory of his own incompetence had been clearly imprinted into his mind, where, from time to time, it played like a movie. Although, of course, his nightmares weren't merely filled with his duel with Julius, but it was something that could rival the memories of so many deaths. Julius, if you can help it, I'd rather that this didn't continue. Thinking of meeting with you in your dreams every night is unpleasant. Subaru, that's rich, coming from the culprit. Don't you think I'd rather share my dreams and intimacy with Amelia Tan? Julius, so your pursuit of her has been reduced to relying on dreams, rather than your own ability. That suits your style. Subaru, you bastard, don't treat me like trash after praising me. And take a look at yourself. Julius, Anastasia-sama is a lovely woman. There is no greater honor than being able to serve her in at a distance. Naturally, I think I should be very happy with my place. At Julius's calm response, Subaru gave a cat-like growl. The uncomfortable atmosphere vanished along with his bow as Julius recovered his usual image. Subaru frowned in relief, coughed, and changed the flow of the conversation. Subaru, about that bearded old man, he said he was the deputy commander or whatever, is that true? Julius, it's understandable that you're doubtful, but that is indeed true. That man was the deputy commander of the Knights of the Kingdom of Lugunica, Heinkel Istria himself. Subaru, are they blind? Or deaf? Or messed up in the head? Julius, you truly do question everything. Of course, none of the senior knights or squires can question the deputy commander's qualifications. In fact, the title of deputy commander serves more like a decoration, and no one has seen him perform his duties as of yet. Julius answered with a shake of his head, and Subaru's imagination swam with the mental image of a senior official. To be given incredible rewards while shirking any truly important responsibilities, that was exactly how Subaru envisioned the majority of senior government officials, and that was indeed Heinkel's situation. On top of that, the people around him even understood his incompetence and knew of his demeanor. Subaru, could it be that he's taking advantage of his status as the Sword Saint's father? Julius, that isn't the entire case. Taking the role of the deputy commander isn't something that would escape the attention of his son, Reinhardt. Although Reinhardt's fairness is universally acknowledged, how can we judge it if it concerns his family? Not everyone would trust him. Subaru, I don't think that Reinhardt would be willing to bend his moral code for his father. Julius, even so, he is still Reinhardt's father. No matter what others think, to Reinhardt, he is undoubtedly a family member who shares his blood. No one can know what he himself thinks. Julius spoke calmly to appease the heated Subaru. Grinding his teeth, Subaru voiced a groan. As Julius said, no matter how mediocre he is, as long as he was Reinhardt's father, then only Reinhardt's own heart would know whether or not he should renounce their relationship. As a knight who values fairness and civility, he should not be deceived by paternity. But it wouldn't be easy for Reinhardt himself to freely cut off such a relationship. Obviously, outsiders could hold a firm stance on what Reinhardt should or shouldn't do, but to do so would be incredibly arrogant. Subaru, isn't the entire case, you said, so are there other reasons? What else could there? Julius, he's also the head of House Istria and Wilhelm Sama's son. To put it bluntly, he's related to the kingdom's best knight and the previous sword saint. The possibility that not gifting him a high-ranking position would lead to treason cannot be overlooked. This was Julius's brief, emotionless reply. Hearing it, Subaru only needed a few seconds to understand the implication behind it. Subaru, this country. Whether it's Reinhardt or Wilhelm, I'd never believe that. If Heinkel resented the country, then the Sword Saint's family would turn against it. Treating them so cautiously, as if they were a time bomb, if that's how it is. If so, wasn't that an insult to Reinhardt and Wilhelm? Their honor was so obvious, yet the country still believed them capable of treason. The anger that Subaru now felt matched the intensity that it had been when he was facing Heinkel. Julius shook his head and pressed a hand to Subaru's shoulder. Julius, your anger is expected. However, the kingdom has to deal with every possibility. Subaru, something impossible isn't a possibility. That kind of thing would clearly, obviously never happen. Julius, Wilhelm Sama was the former commander of Lugunica's knights. Subaru, huh? Subaru, who'd been trying to escape Julius's grip, unconsciously stopped moving at those words. Julius, 14 years ago, a member of the royal family had been abducted in the capital. At that time, Wilhelm Sama had headed the guards and was placed in charge of the search. Subaru, so, what about it? Even I know about famous events like this. Felt was the member of the royal family who had been abducted in childhood. This was a story that had become widespread. Subaru, who'd already dismissed the story, didn't catch the meaning of Julius's words. Subaru, I know the royal child was never found. So what then? Wilhelm San took responsibility and then resigned as a knight, so he has a reason to hate the kingdom? But then, Julius, at that time, the former sword saint, was sent on an expedition to subjugate the white whale, that is, during the days when Wilhelm Sama had been searching for the abductor. Subaru. Pondering Julius's words, Subaru fell into a void of thought. Something Wilhelm had once said seemed to fill that blank in. Wilhelm had said that he hadn't been at his wife's side when she died. Subaru, he said he couldn't be with his wife when she died, and since the investigation was what kept him from it, then, Wilhelm-san would end up hating the kingdom, or something. Julius, I don't know what Wilhelm Sama's true intent was. However, it's true that after the search for the abducted princess ended, and the great conquest ended in failure, Wilhelm Sama withdrew from the guards. After that, that branch of the knights would have collapsed if it weren't for the steps Marcus Sama took to reorganize them. Subaru, I don't give a damn about that. I'm trying to talk about Wilhelm-san. Is that what you think? That Wilhelm-san would resent everyone because of his wife? That's raising a banner of rebellion toward the kingdom due to his own resentment. Was that really how Wilhelm Banastria appeared? Why, after seeing someone who was so deeply in love, and willing to give up everything for his love, could anyone think that? Had they never looked him in the eye, or gazed at his steady back? Had they never seen the sword demon's frank, honest blade? Subaru, that person would never do such a thing. Why does nobody understand? Julius. This time, Subaru indeed threw off the hand on his shoulder, and shoved at Julius's chest. He stood and backed up, losing his momentum. The yellow eyes looking back at him seemed to almost admire Subaru's anger. He understood. He knew that this degree of anger was inappropriate. What Julius had said to Subaru had not reflected his own views. Julius's own attitude was apparent. After all, 1 year ago, Julius had comforted Wilhelm after he'd slain the white whale. He'd comforted Wilhelm, who had spent 14 long years trying to avenge his wife. There was no doubt that he would never have suspected that Wilhelm would ever hold a revolt against the kingdom. Subaru, sorry. I was being an idiot. Julius, no, don't apologize. You're in the right. I'm the one in the wrong. If anyone should apologize, it's me. Dropping their gazes, they both closed their eyes. They both felt an unbearable weight. Their helplessness in doing anything to change the country's doubt in Wilhelm. Subaru and Julius both, even if they vented their feelings, were still ultimately powerless. Subaru, so is Reinhardt also like that? Julius, by the same logic, Reinhardt would resent the kingdom for sending his grandmother to her death and in turn killing his predecessor, but that isn't the case. Subaru, then. Julius, however, the kingdom doesn't doubt that Reinhardt has no intent in holding a rebellion. Rather, that suspicion goes to Heinkel Sama. At the appearance of Reinhardt's father's name, Subaru's eyes widened. Even though it was a name he didn't want to hear, he couldn't just plug his ears at the topic. Any conversation involving that name wouldn't be pleasant. Subaru, how's Reinhardt's relationship with his father? Aside from the obvious blood one. Julius, there was a period of time when Reinhardt gave Heinkel Sama his complete, utmost obedience. That might seem natural since they're father and son, but that time exceeded the bounds of what it should have been. Julius averted his eyes from Subaru's, as if speaking regretfully. The relationship that he'd said exceeded the bounds of a typical parent-child relationship. His words were vague enough that it was difficult to know what he'd meant. However, Julius didn't look eager to elaborate, and returned his gaze to Subaru. Julius, as Reinhardt grew to be more self-reliant, that attitude should have disappeared. But without decisively knowing whether or not Reinhardt would still listen to Heinkel Sama's words, those doubts cannot dissipate. Subaru, so to keep Heinkel from giving Reinhardt an order to turn against the kingdom, Heinkel was shown favor, right? Julius, perhaps it's even worse. Although this is still a rumor that is considered hearsay, I'll tell you, since you're also Reinhardt's friend, and you felt anger for his sake. With that troubling opening remark, Julius looked over their surroundings with a sweep. Confirming that there were no eavesdroppers, he stood close to Subaru's side. Then, Julius, the deputy commander, was a suspect in the investigation of the abduction of the princess 14 years ago. Subaru. Julius, there is no conclusive evidence. However, he has been repeatedly questioned about his suspected involvement. Subaru, if that's true, then the abduction was. Julius, the truth of that is no longer relevant. Such a suspicious character holding one of the kingdom's highest positions of power, that's the crux of the problem now. The glorious blessing following the title of Sword Saint. However, as more and more of the situation came to light, Subaru began to think that the title was more curse than blessing. Subaru, however, if he really was related to the abduction, then Heinkel is the reason why his father and mother couldn't meet face to face one last time. Julius, that's not all. I've also heard that it was Heinkel-sama who recommended that Theoresia-sama, who'd already set her blade aside, be the one to take his place against the white whale. Subaru, he actually sent his mother to the battle with the white whale. Julius, there is an accurate record of this. The deputy commander refused to battle with the white whale, and instead recommended that his mother do it. Utterly speechless. Subaru could not find it in himself to formulate a response. Unlike the unfounded rumor before, what Julius had just said was backed up by real evidence. Records and witnesses meant that this was fact. Heinkel sent his own mother as his replacement to the battle with the white whale. That is to say, his mother subsequently died in battle, and his father took up the blade of revenge when he could not be with his mother in her last moments. However, rather than face any punishment, he used his son's talent as a shield which protected his comfortable and stable life. How could it be? How could there be a human who was capable of this? Subaru, there has to be a mistake somewhere, right? He didn't want to believe it. It wasn't about wanting to believe in Heinkel's humanity. Subaru had already accepted him as the worst kind of person, and anyone who spoke to him could instantly tell. However, he was reluctant to admit that such evil beyond evil, such immorality, such depravity even existed. He hoped to believe in ethics or honor, human nature, and had thought there was a limit to how much evil human nature could permit. However, things that would be a sin even in imagination could happen in reality. Julius, sorry. That's not something I should have told someone who hadn't fully prepared themselves. Julius whispered to the speechless Subaru, his voice shrouded in gloom. Subaru could fully empathize with the feelings which Julius's tone had given away, something which was entirely unlike the always calm Julius. Subaru, it's not your fault, I was the one who wanted to hear. Although it would be a little easier if I could blame you. Julius, I'm not in a position to accept your words. Obviously, what I relayed to you were just rumors about another family's business, but I still spoke of them as if I'd witnessed them myself. No matter how you look at it, I spoke without thinking of the gravity of those rumors. As a knight, I really should be ashamed. Subaru, but you witnessed it, didn't you? Since you're Reinhardt's friend. Subaru replied to Julius's self-deprecation. Julius again lifted his head toward Subaru, who nodded back at him. Subaru, although I don't know the specifics of your friendship with Reinhardt, I can still see that you're worried about him. So I won't condemn your anger, or call it too aggressive. I don't think it's right to just step out of something like that solely because it's not your business. Julius, then, what would you do? Subaru, is it wrong to interfere if you hear others around you crying? If I saw my friend feeling hopeless, I'd certainly call to him. If you care about Reinhardt, doing so would be completely natural. Especially since your feelings aren't like mine. If Julius were to interfere for nothing other than his curiosity, Subaru would regard him with contempt. However, Julius's feelings, as proven by both his attitude and his words in their exchange, were nothing so shameful. Subaru, didn't I just tell you? There's no need to adhere so rigidly to your knightly honor or whatever. Even if there were, occasionally taking off your armor and becoming Julie wouldn't be so bad. Who's to say that acting casually wouldn't lead to a better situation? Julie was the pseudonym Julius had given during the battle with the witch cult. Due to his position, Julius was unable to join any mercenary group, so he'd elegantly hidden his identity with a slight falsehood. It was a name that everyone had eventually given up on using, even Julius himself. However, that Julius was the one who'd been least like a knight. Julius, Julie, that name really came from out of the blue. Subaru, it was from so long ago, and it was only used once. I'm pretty impressed with myself for remembering it. Julius, don't adhere so rigidly to your knightly honor or whatever. You've really said some difficult things. I'm sure you know what they all call me. Subaru, it's because they've been calling you the greatest and whatnot that you've become so physically and mentally stiff. You should shed that armor when you bathe, and do some stretches with me before putting it back on. Subdued bent over, affixing his palms to the ground as if showing off his newfound flexibility. Although his body had been quite stiff before he'd started learning parkour, he'd learned to move with more softness and pliability. Then, to the Subaru who was showing off his flexibility. Julius, if you're trying to show me up, I really can't do anything but sigh. Subaru will. As he spoke, Julius spread his legs apart and reached toward the ground. Subaru couldn't help but admire his control over his slender legs and the suppleness of his hips as he lowered himself to the ground. Was that to say that Julius could easily surpass Subaru in any area? Subaru, but. If it were playing a lute lyre or sewing, I'd definitely win. Julius, although I can't see the merit in triumphing in hobbies, I've also taken up playing musical instruments. Although I'd have to say that tailoring is fairly difficult. Subaru, You said it. Hobbies. A hobby held by a guy like you can't be anything but superficial. I'll never form a band with you. My lead singer role will be taken away. Julius unwound his feet and stood with a flourish. He suddenly flicked his bangs at Subaru, then smiled at the sky as if boasting a victory. Julius, I see. As Julie, gazing at the sky and bathing in the wind feels like this. Subaru? Julius, in retrospect, the sky I saw back then was also somewhat different from how it usually was. So this would be the reason then. Subaru, you keep getting more and more unreasonable. You fake bastard. Subaru shrugged his shoulders in annoyance and flopped onto the floor of the corridor. Julius narrowed his eyes at him as if still dazzled by the sun. At last, the uncomfortable air surrounding their conversation had dispersed. Of course, what they discussed was still lodged in their memories and not still remained in their chests. But, even so, they could at least work through their frustration together. Looking at only that image, those two seemed like a pair of ordinary friends. Chapter 18, A Time for Song and Dance. Subaru finished his simultaneously important and trivial conversation with Julius and left the water plumage pavilion with Emilia and Beatrice. Emilia, in the courtyard, you were chatting in a friendly way with Julius for once. What were you talking about? Subaru, first of all, thinking that I was being friendly with that guy was a mistake, but what do you think we were talking about? Emilia, where should we go play next time? Something like that. Subaru, are we school friends? Even if Emilia's casual assumption about their relationship was right, even assuming that Julius and Subaru went to the same school, they would be in entirely different social groups. Schools, just like society, ran on a hierarchy. In a sense, didn't something similar to a division between classes exist universally? Subaru, whether in this world or another world, those hardships are the same. Emilia, hey, what did you talk about? Subaru, I was anxious to ask about those hostile recent events. What exactly happened earlier? What preceded that? What's going to happen next? Those kinds of topics. Emilia, isn't that being friendly? Emilia tilted her head in question. Subaru followed suit with a sigh. Looking at only their trivial words at the end of their conversation, maybe they did look like friends. But it was himself and Julius, so that wasn't possible. He wasn't a friend, he was something infinitely more annoying. Although it was impossible to say exactly what that was. Subaru, well, he's definitely not a friend. There's no doubt about it. Emilia, honestly. Emilia turned around to look to Beatrice, who wordlessly sighed in response. Subaru felt somewhat annoyed by the air of mutual understanding between the two. In any case, his conversation with Julius in the courtyard had concerned Reinhardt, Wilhelm, and their relationship with Heinkel Istria. So if he truthfully conveyed the contents of their conversation to Emilia, then Subaru would feel rather guilty. In addition to hesitating to reveal the private affairs of the Istria family, Subaru didn't want to cause unnecessary stress for Emilia. After all, this was a helpless, tricky situation. The history of the Istria family wasn't something that outsiders could easily approach. Julius had been involved in the history himself and, acknowledging Subaru's concern, had relayed everything to him. And still, Subaru felt a nauseous itch in his stomach. Emilia, so, Subaru. Although it's a pleasure to take a walk like this, what are you planning? Subaru. While Subaru wrestled with his inner anxiety, Emilia suddenly smiled and uttered such a remark. Subaru, taken by surprise, was momentarily lost for words. He hurriedly blinked and shrugged. Subaru, that's harsh to hear, Emilia Tan. I just had a pure wish to wander the beautiful Watergate City with Emilia Tan. At most, I have only a trace of a temptation to lure you too close to a fountain, and appreciate your appearance when soaked with water. Emilia, Hugh, Subaru, to say such a thing. You really are a stubborn person. Even I know that something so trivial isn't your real intent. Beatrice. Emilia raised her pouting cheeks, and Subaru pressed an uncomfortable hand to his forehead. He looked to Beatrice for aid, however. The young girl walking between Emilia and Subaru gazed up at Subaru with the same expression Emilia wore. Without any support, Subaru quickly raised his hands in surrender. Subaru, okay, I surrender. I'm sorry. I won't splash Emilia Tan. Emilia, Subier are you? When his name was called out in anger, Subaru dropped his raised hands and surrendered for real this time. Emilia, Subaru, you naughty. Subaru, you saw through me, Emilia Tan. Although, I was your mentor, so I should be rewarded, right, I'll be serious now. Emilia, honestly. In response to Emilia, who'd raised her hand in an I'll hit you gesture, Subaru could only smile. Subaru, I wasn't trying to hide anything, I just wanted to give you a little surprise. Right now, we're headed to Pristella's City Park, where yesterday I had unexpectedly met the songstress. Emilia, wow, songstress-san. Then, will she be there today? Subaru, your shining eyes are adorable. Yeah, I have the famed songstress's contact information. Although I have faith in Otto's ability to negotiate, I also have faith that his bad luck will probably cost us this opportunity. So this is insurance. Emilia, I see. And if we're on good terms with Songstress-san, then asking Kiritaka-san to trade us the or would be like a personal favor. Subaru, that's it. Well done. Subaru gestured his arms over his head in the shape of a circle. Emilia was so innocent. In fact, although the transaction would hardly be as simple and straightforward as Emilia had said, there was no need to point out her mistake. Emilia was only purely looking forward to getting along with Liliana. Subaru could handle all of the other stuff in secret. Subaru, I can't help but feel that the likes of Emilia-tan and Liliana will have some kind of a chemical reaction. Emilia, chemical reaction? Subaru, from the looks of it, I think Emilia-tan and Liliana will get along well. Emilia, will we? Haha, I hope so. Although somewhat apologetic to Emilia, who was just looking forward to meeting, Subaru had already been somewhat beset by the fatigue that would surely follow any meeting with Liliana. Even while hoping that Liliana would be in the park to fulfill his goals, Subaru prayed that he wouldn't have to see her again. Of course, if she wasn't there, the afternoon would just be a date with Emilia. Although he wanted to avoid that, Subaru couldn't deny that he would enjoy it. Subaru, Emilia-tan, don't you want to go water cruising with me? I think that'd be fun, and it would strengthen our bonds. Emilia, I'm not sure what cruising is, but I think Subaru would get seasick if we did. That would tire you out, so we should avoid it. Beatrice, not to mention, the park is right in front of us, in fact. Now isn't the time to give up, I suppose. Beatrice pulled on an uncomfortable Subaru's wrist, and led him onwards as she continued to walk forward. They arrived at the destination without any hesitation, and Subaru gave up any resistance after seeing the entrance to the park. The fountain located at the center or city's park showed an unexpected spectacle. The audience gathered in the park was larger than yesterday's. Subaru, since we came here earlier, I was prepared for the possibility that Liliana wouldn't be here. Seeing the crowd gathered, however, that thought turned out to be just a mere worry. Today's performance seemed upbeat, with both rallies and applause from fanatical listeners, an atmosphere which dominated the park. Subaru, clapping and yelling? Beatrice, today looks quite a bit more lively than yesterday, in fact. Met with the same confusion as Subaru, Beatrice titled her head to the side. Although it had been delivered by this morning's magic device, Liliana's singing typically peacefully, quietly drew its audience away from reality. It was precisely because of that nature that the presence of this frenzied crowd seemed off. The expected situation had been mixed with something unexpected. Emilia, everyone seems to be enjoying themselves. She really deserves to be Songstress-san. Although Emilia was eager to push through the hustle and bustle to have a good look, Subaru had a bad feeling about the entire situation. As they approached the front of the crowded audience, Subaru began to feel an uneasy sense of regret. Subaru. However, he couldn't quite vocalize that feeling, and so Subaru had no excuse to stop. Not to mention that Emilia was looking forward to seeing the commotion for herself. After all, Subaru could not betray those amethyst eyes which sparkled with expectation. Soon after, the fanaticism of the masses turned into a thunderous round of applause as they continued to push through the crowd. That is to say, the cause of that commotion was coming to an end. The place where the crowd's excited sight was concentrated became visible. There. Liliana, that was a really amazing dance. After seeing this extraordinary dance, I started to lose myself. Priscilla, not at all, your performance and singing were what captured mine attention so completely. Just as it deserved to. It has been a long time since I've seen such a display of skill. There, talking and shaking hands tightly with each other, were the songstress and a woman of crimson. Subaru's intuition had been right. Today, Subaru again bore witness to an audience shedding tears to Liliana's playing and singing. If something today were different from yesterday, it would be the presence of Priscilla, who stood beside Liliana. Also, being showered with your dance was too powerful, so touching, I'll definitely come again. The recipient of all this generous praise, Priscilla, fanned herself and spread her arms wide in response. After that rough interaction with their fans, the only people left were Subaru, Emilia, and Beatrice. Noticing their obtrusively idleness, Liliana's twin tails bounced once more. Liliana, oh hey. If it isn't Natsuki-sama and Emilia-sama. And Natsuki-sama's little girl-sama. What are you all up to? Beatrice, I wouldn't know who this girl-sama is, I suppose. Subaru, explain it to me, in fact. Subaru, why don't we let the one who came up with the name explain it? Here, I'll give you some tasty candy, so behave. Beatrice, you won't fool me like this, I suppose MMM. Setting aside Beatrice, who was busy sucking on the sweet in the mouth, Subaru turned to Liliana, whose twin ponytails bounced eagerly like dog tails. Although Emilia exaggeratedly widened her eyes in response, Liliana's presentation of her odd behavior was only just beginning. Subaru, although it's only been a day, here you are, staging another grand performance. Were you kicked out by Karitaka again? Liliana, yeah. Well, that would be right. The one who loved me gave me such an earnest plea, so I complied. Isn't that the mark of an excellent woman? I think it is. Subaru, so, even after being booted out, you thought that holding a performance would be perfectly fine. Liliana straightened her thin chest and stroked a non-existent mustache. Next to her, Priscilla stood with arms crossed across her ample chest. Catching sight of Subaru, she snorted at him with contempt. Priscilla, what have you been doing? Even if you were taken in by mine allure, resting your gaze upon me like that is incredibly rude. Men who are obsessed with mine beauty are at most allowed to inhale my scent to fuel their sweet dreams. Subaru, I didn't see your dance, but even if I had I wouldn't have been too excited. I only like delicate-type girls like Emilia Tan, so your alluring body doesn't do much for me. Priscilla, preferring a half-witch over me is a mark of utter helplessness. Of course, I am not so narrow-minded as to accept strange tastes. Moreover, if you cannot understand true beauty, then your gaze can only be dismissed as hopelessly short-sighted. Subaru sensed a certain futility in attempting to argue with her. Their values were too different. Subaru couldn't direct common sense at Priscilla, who genuinely believed that the world itself belonged to her. Anyway. Emilia, an amazing dance, that is to say, Priscilla was dancing? Priscilla, feel regret that you missed it. Dancing is not something I do lightly. That is to say, that this artist's song had something to offer. Priscilla presented Liliana to the stunned Emilia. Subaru was shocked by her answer, while Liliana rolled her eyes at him. Ignoring Liliana, who began to pretend she was blowing bubbles, Subaru stared straight at Priscilla. Subaru, you danced for people? That's completely unexpected. Priscilla, then, how would you regard the frenzy of that crowd of fools just now? Although that artist's song did have magic in it, without the presence of mine dance, the audience would have merely fallen into a stupor and become puppets who could only listen. Although that could be said to be a form of enjoyment, I am not fond of it. Fools will remain fools, and the ignorant will remain ignorant. Why not have color added to both mine and their day? Subaru, in other words, fools indulging in foolishness will be happier? Priscilla, H.O. You're obviously a commoner, but you're quite adept at comprehension. Feeling grateful at Priscilla's praise would be impossible. Not to mention that Priscilla showed no sign that she'd remembered that she'd completely forgotten about his existence in the inn. He'd just settled for being fine with Priscilla remembering about Emilia. Liliana, but, Priscilla-sama and Emilia-sama. So many exciting people are assembled here, I really appreciate it. Liliana had withstood the sinister atmosphere and offered that reaction. She had picked up on the rivalry between the two, and had designated herself as the mediator, rather than the awkward Subaru doing so. Maybe her odd quirks and airheadedness were just a mask. Liliana, was my song so beautiful? Honestly, that just embarrasses me. He. Subaru, nope, this is her real nature. Liliana was blinded by her own praise and fell into a fidgeting embarrassment. Subaru realized he'd overestimated her and slumped his shoulders disappointedly. Then, he suddenly noticed that there was no one around Priscilla. Subaru, are you alone? No Al, or that damn bastard, or the cute butler. Priscilla, I allowed Schultz to go for a walk, but he seems to have gotten lost. He tries very hard, but is a good-for-nothing at everything he does, that's the cute kind of child he is. Since AL's constant nagging is annoying, I sent him out to look for Schultz. As for the damn bastard, I am unsure. Perhaps he's at a tavern somewhere. Subaru, so damn bastard is actually a common language between us. Subaru was thrown off by the unexpectedly serious reply. It seemed that Heinkel was poorly received even by his own faction. Although he fully understood why Heinkel was treated that way, why had Priscilla bothered to invite sometime like that to her faction? Subaru, she'd definitely say something like because having him nearby would interesting though. Priscilla, you seem to understand quite well. Well, I collected him for some rather small reasons. Those who approach me and attempt to market themselves will be welcome so long as I can find them a purpose for mine amusement. If they become an obstacle, they can be discarded at any time. That man is, at best, this kind of person. Subaru, no, how do I say this? He doesn't seem like he'd live up to your expectations in any way whatsoever. It seemed as if it was precisely because her expectations had not been met that Priscilla had flown into a violent rage. But perhaps Priscilla had even already long forgotten that event. Subaru, but don't you feel like this is dangerous? At this point in time, I'd never let Emiliatan go out alone. Priscilla, mine attendants are absent, and were I to be in danger, then I would be at a disadvantage. Such a line of thought is only fitting for those who can only gaze at mine back. Subaru, is that it? That was quite a disdainful judgment of AL's capabilities. However, after seeing Priscilla in action, that perspective was understandable. At the earlier meal, the ability that Priscilla had demonstrated was superior to humankind. Subaru, speaking of which, I've also been kicked in the jaw before. During the loops that had happened in the capital, Subaru had once displeased Priscilla enough to have been kicked in the face. His body had flown so high it had hit the ceiling, and he'd landed in the adjacent room. That severe pain had felt like a broken jaw. Subaru, so, you threw Al aside and came to see Liliana? Priscilla, this mere urban landscape has done well to soothe mine boredom. Unlike the narrow structure of the capital, the city has many a place worth viewing. As I explored, a lovely river of song flowed to me. Liliana, yeah, at first when the dancing created a frenzy I really had no clue what would happen. Sometimes there are people who recklessly join my performance and change the mood. Although most of the time my song hits them and they change their minds. Subaru, you really don't act like the songstress should at all. To just invade a song like that was too bold of a move. And, indeed, it was rather a shock that Priscilla had joined in with a dance. That the audience had been so taken with it meant that her dancing was on par with the song itself. Priscilla, although it would be a stretch to say you could win hearts and minds like I can, there is in fact a certain value in your voice. How about it? Come to mine's side. Let mine influence give you status, and allow me to offer you the honor of playing for mine mansion. Liliana. In other words, Priscilla rather appreciated Liliana's song and gave her an unreasonable demand. Although the idea painted Liliana as Priscilla's personal musician, darker implications behind Priscilla's words were present as well. If her anger at being unable to win Liliana reached the same level as her appreciation for Liliana's music, what would she do? It was that terrible implication. Then, Liliana replied. Liliana, thank you very much. That's such an uplifting evaluation, and it makes me really happy. But. Please allow me to refuse. She didn't know about Priscilla's terrible anger, nor was she capable of reading the mood. With that horrifying ignorance, she rejected Priscilla's proposal with casual enthusiasm. Priscilla, you refuse. Why? Sure enough, Priscilla's voice lowered and her gaze darkened. Shivering. Subaru, who was completely unrelated to the situation between them, felt a blade of cold brush his back. In one sentence, the atmosphere was about to turn deadly. In her own world, free of tension, Liliana stroked the box which held her instrument. Liliana, I am Liliana, a traveling bard. Although it is true that I am being asked to stay in the city like this, I am a traveler who will return to wandering with the wind sooner or later. Not bound by the land, not bound by others, that is how I serve my profession, such a way of survival that has long been decided. Priscilla, therefore mine invitation was refused. Liliana, whether my mother, or her mother's mother, my family has always walked that path. We are all people who have chosen to forsake everything that is material, so we may live on through song in the hearts of others. No one can capture the wind, just as no one can stop a song. Therefore, Priscilla. Liliana, although I am very happy about your invitation, please allow me to refuse. After all, even I cannot know where my song will travel, because every decision has been entrusted to the wind. Lifting her instrument, speaking proudly, Liliana's expression bore no trace of hesitation. Her usual tricky expression was gone, as was her deliberately affected atmosphere that existed to provoke the nerves of others. There was just a bard the songstress who wanted to preserve her stories in song. After listening to Liliana's reply, Priscilla held one hand aloft and closed one eye. With her other eye she trained a scorching crimson gaze at Liliana. Then, at Liliana's unwavering expression, Priscilla suddenly gave a sigh. Priscilla, excellent. That determination is also pleasing. I will allow it. The vulgar one here seems to have been I. Liliana, no, not at all. I am very, deeply sorry. Toward Priscilla, whose mouth was on the verge of blooming into a smile, Liliana offered a heartfelt response. Really, the interaction between the two left Subaru dumbstruck. Squinting at his frozen expression, Priscilla frowned as if displeased. Priscilla, what is it, commoner? You seem bothered. Subaru, it's really nothing other than shock. I thought you were going to bisect Liliana after she rejected you, and I started to shiver. Priscilla, that's a rather ridiculous worry. No such thing would happen, was what Priscilla's humph indicated. However, before she had heard Liliana's reasoning, Priscilla had no doubt intended to kill her. Before that decision had been consciously reached, however, Liliana's opportune words had the balance to tilt in a lucky direction. At least, that was how Subaru saw it. Emilia, but I was also a little surprised. Since Priscilla-san seems like a I'll take whatever I want kind of person. The landmine that Subaru had taken pains to avoid was unexpectedly triggered by Emilia. Emilia bluntly blurted out her impression of Priscilla. Subaru involuntarily straightened his back and spun around to face Priscilla. But Priscilla merely closed her eyes and... Priscilla, what foolish words, half-witch. How could your clouded eyes ever judge mine character? There is a limit how many impolite insults I will stand for. Beatrice, what an unforgivable girl, in fact. If you have time to muse on the helplessness of others, then you should reflect on yourself and your own demeanor, I suppose. Betty thinks that would be more meaningful to both parties, in fact. Emilia, Beatrice. As she listened to Priscilla's relentless derision, Beatrice gripped the confused Emilia's hand. Priscilla, however, raised her eyebrows, looking at Beatrice as if noticing her for the first time. Priscilla, such a little girl dares to speak like that. Mine magnanimity is not determined by age. If you hold the incorrect notion that your youth will spare you mine wrath, you'd best change your attitude right now. Beatrice, your meddling really is unnecessary, I suppose. What should you call little girl, in fact? Taking Betty's appearance at face value cost you dearly. A flame burst into existence between Priscilla and Beatrice. The two girls dressed in elaborate dresses both looked to be terribly angry. Although Subaru never doubted for a second that Beatrice would win, he knew that these conflicts were inevitable when the royal candidates met. This was just the type of relationship they had. Subaru, don't be so stubborn, Biko. Priscilla's just volatile like this, and arguing with her is pointless. Beatrice, Subaru, do not stop Betty, in fact. Aren't you angry that Emilia is being belittled, I suppose? Show me your masculinity, in fact. Subaru, could you not say such terrible things? Not to mention. Subaru was shocked that Beatrice, who rarely showed concern toward people who weren't him, was angry for Emilia's sake. Even Emilia, the recipient of that concern, was surprised. Emilia, Beatrice, I'm fine. Moving Beatrice's hand out of the way, Emilia gently touched the girl's head. For a second, a tearful expression appeared on Beatrice's face. But it only lasted for a moment. Beatrice adopted her usual expression as she turned back to Priscilla. Beatrice, be grateful that you've been spared, I suppose. Priscilla, that's how you should feel. Thank your own cute face. Both Beatrice and Priscilla snorted slightly. Although at the end Priscilla had ended up praising Beatrice's appearance, the infuriated Beatrice was completely unaware. Anyway, I'll let you go because you're cute. That was an odd explanation. Subaru didn't understand at all. Subaru, you really are an irrational woman. Priscilla, of course. Are you so proud that you believe yourself capable of seeing through any woman, let alone I? Subaru, are you saying it's my fault? What really started this incident was you telling Liliana, I want you. Priscilla's reasoning for allowing Liliana to escape the palm of her hand remained a mystery. Subaru directed a curious gaze at her. Unexpectedly, Priscilla covered her mouth with her fan. Priscilla, everything in this world is already mine. As such, there is no necessity to hold all that is beautiful and lofty in mine palm. Those things just need to exist. As long as they continue to exist, then there is no problem. Subaru. Priscilla, this world is already mine courtyard, that is to say, where a songbird sings is unimportant. Placing her into the cage? Vulgar. Guarding her from an outside enemy's hands? Vulgar. In fact, those are all rather troublesome actions. Priscilla's views drove any of Subaru's presumptions into the ground. Her alienation from even alienation left Subaru speechless. That wasn't to say that Subaru couldn't understand what she was saying. However, what she saw was just too different from what Subaru saw. Therefore, Subaru would never understand her for as long as he lived. Frankly, he thought it was horrible. But maybe it could be seen in another light. This terrible feeling, perhaps, might also inspire admiration or longing in others. Maybe that was exactly why I chose to follow Priscilla. Liliana, hey. Now that everyone's calmed down, let me serve as an ambassador and show off goodwill as I show off my voice. Yeah, I'll do just that. In this way, slicing through the atmosphere, Liliana abruptly made her own proposal. She took her lute lyre and played a quick chord on its strings, before concentrating on swaying her own body along. Liliana, only this time, Priscilla-sama doesn't need to join in with a dance, just enjoying the song is fine. I will open fire with the full passion of the songstress. Please listen carefully. Priscilla, ho! Liliana's words brought an expression of interest to Priscilla's face. Liliana, Emilia-sama seemed to have first arrived as my first song ended. I hope that instead of seeing me as a singer whose selling point is her cuteness, you'll come to see me as poet who has earned a little bit of money with performance skill. Emilia, wow, really? Liliana, although I'm not the most qualified of musicians, I hope you'll be satisfied. Regardless of Liliana's assertion, Emilia was undoubtedly interested in her performance and singing. That was why Emilia, who had been taken in by their previous interaction, looked forward to Liliana's proposal. Taking note of the subtle sense of distance between Emilia and Priscilla, Liliana appeared to enter a state of preparation. She discreetly waved Subaru over and said in a quiet voice, Liliana, Natsuki-sama, Natsuki-sama. Although this is just my personal opinion, are Emilia-sama and Priscilla-sama on poor terms? Subaru, that's hardly a matter of opinion, it's obvious from their exchanges. Besides, Priscilla doesn't get along with anyone, of course there's tension with Emilia. Liliana, this is huge. Liliana seemed shocked, and her hair jumped like an alert dog's tail. Were her nerves linked to her hair? He really wanted to reach out and grab it. Liliana, so, let me come here and cut that tension away, and unite the two in a world of charm and song. Ah. Just now, did your imagination just annoyingly turn somewhere dangerous when I said cut? That's no good. Subaru, it's exhausting when you say both inspiring and uninspiring things in one sentence, so don't do that anymore. Subaru marveled at Liliana, who seemed like a madman, yet was capable of caring for others. Sweeping away the bad air with a song, something simple and straightforward. Both were companions in shared interest to Liliana's singing. Even Priscilla wouldn't act cynically toward Emilia, as she listened to the songstress she so admired. Liliana, after the song ends and they chat again, shouldn't we prepare food and drinks for them? Indulging in sweet snacks will certainly create a mood that will close the distance between them, don't you think so? Subaru, no, I don't think so. Liliana, after the song ends and they chat again, shouldn't we prepare food and drinks for them? Indulging in sweet snacks will certainly create a mood that will close the distance between them, don't you think so? Subaru, is this a parody where I can't advance unless I say yes? Liliana presented that false choice with the same inflection and tone, and Subaru had no choice but to give up and choose yes. Liliana's expression suddenly became open again. The high degree of difficulty in communication between the human species and the Liliana species had yet to be considered properly. Subaru, alright, I'll buy some snacks while Liliana sings. Emilia-tan, I'll be right back, so don't argue with anyone and wait here quietly, okay? Emilia, really? You don't need to worry so much, and besides it wouldn't happen anyway. I don't want to fight with Priscilla-san. Subaru had cautioned Emilia just to be sure, but she wore a large smile. Although he didn't doubt Emilia, even if she does not initiate an argument, the presence of Priscilla made the likelihood of one rather high. Subaru, Beatrice. If something happens with Emilia-tan, I'll leave it up to you. Beatrice, I know in fact. That girl, if she tries to talk again, I'll turn her into ash, I suppose. Subaru, you won't argue either, right? Committing the task to Beatrice, who was much more volatile than Emilia, Subaru prepared to leave the park. But before that. Subaru, Priscilla, is there anything you won't eat? Priscilla, how unexpected. A commoner like you is actually showing consideration. Well, in that case, prepare something interesting. If you find something boring, I'll lift you up by your head and slam you down again. Subaru, guessing what you'd like would be like playing rock paper scissors, why'd you have to impose that cruel condition? Subaru thought about giving her the first delicacy he could find. Priscilla being Priscilla frowned at his answer. Priscilla, rock, paper, scissors? She tilted her head to the side. Since she'd once forgotten Subaru, maybe she'd forgotten the condition she'd imposed. Already. Subaru had no idea what to say. She truly was impossible to deal with in every sense of the word. Emilia, Subaru, be careful. Beatrice, if anything happens, call for Betty in fact. Sent off by Emilia and Beatrice's gazes, Subaru waved his hand. Afterwards, he waved his hand and winked at Liliana as if flirting, then ran from the park. Soon afterwards, Liliana's light melody came. Hearing it, Subaru thought of returning to the park as soon as possible. If he didn't join her solo at all, it wouldn't work. He injected more power into his running stride. It had been 10 minutes since Subaru left the park. Subaru, I'm so worthless, really. After leaving the store, Subaru looked at the contents of his bag inside. In order to procure proper desserts, the errand boy Subaru went for the first suitable store he found and completed his shopping as soon as possible. Although he was intrigued by Pristella's famous delicacy, a rare product called Gina jelly, he didn't have the courage to bring it back to Priscilla. Although phrasing it as fearing the deterioration the relationship between the two factions sounded nice, what Subaru in fact feared was Priscilla herself. Subaru, but I wonder if this tastes the same as unagi jelly. Although I do feel ashamed about lacking the courage to confirm it for myself, I don't quite hate myself. Subaru whistled at his complicated self-examination, running along the road to the park at a brisk pace. He'd counted the 10 minutes since he'd left, and there had been no change in his contract link with Beatrice. Even so, his masculine pride bid him to return as soon as possible, but... Subaru, sorry. Turning quickly around a corner, he nearly collided with someone. Although he'd hurriedly avoided them, Subaru turned his head to make sure. Subaru, sorry. I don't think I hit you, but are you good? Hey, brother. Are you apologizing? Then you should show me more sincerity. The man who Subaru had almost collided with replied in a rough voice, his expression changing as he saw Subaru. At the same time, Subaru himself was also stunned. Subaru, whoa, is it Chin? You were even hired by Felt, why are you still doing the same foolish things? Larkins, you're so damn annoying. I've told you that it's not Chin. And what are you even doing here? The man who angrily spat those words was yesterday's messenger who'd made a mess of delivering his message. According to what Felt had said, he had supposedly been instructed to spend the night at another hotel in the city. Subaru, you're all alone, and not with Ton and Can? That's really curious. Larkins, curious or whatever, what do you even know about me? There's nothing between us, so why do you keep trying to start something? You're so annoying, goddamn move already. Subaru, you're so cold, even though we have a relationship of life and death. Larkins, I don't remember that kind of thing. Larkins, who was unfamiliar with Subaru, made an irritated face as he tried to avoid him. Even Subaru himself had trouble understanding why he felt such a kinship. Perhaps the censors in Subaru's heart treated Tonchinkin as mortal associates. So many of the people in this world were ridiculously strong, so facing them would have Subaru breathed a sigh of relief. Even though they'd obviously once killed him. He was really getting bolder. Larkins, anyway. Don't bother me. I'm working right now. Subaru, the you who used to screw around and mess with people is now doing proper work. I'm so happy for you. Larkins, who is this? As Subaru pretended to weep, Larkins escaped from him and headed for the crowd. Having received a cold reaction, Subaru scratched his head in self-reflection. If you had the bad habit of not taking the initiative to talk to people, there would also be a lingering sense of distance. Watching Larkins disappear into the sea of people, Subaru turned toward the park again. And then his feet suddenly stopped. Subaru, Subaru turns his head and begins to feel suspicious. Before his eyes, in that subtle moment, is the reason that Subaru stopped. There were people who had stopped. The crowd that Larkins had headed toward were all frozen in their tracks, and Subaru inadvertently followed suit. Larkins curled his lip and pushed his way out of the crowd. Larkins, this guy, that guy, and this guy too. What are you all looking at? Filled with irritated insults, Larkins also aligned his gaze with the gaze of the masses, which pointed above the roof of a towering building. An exceptionally tall building, inlaid with a mosaic of crystal engravings, a building that held a bell. In any metropolis or town, this building would be taken for granted. Each city or town would have several of these clock towers. In the city of Pristella, there were also a number of clock towers scattered about. The clock tower here was merely one of many. However, gosh, honestly. Please excuse me, I'm very sorry. There, a figure stood, staring out from the open window of the clock tower, dangerously close to its edge. The figure's attire drew the attention of everyone nearby, and its voice trembled as if bathing in the weight of all that attention. Thank you. I really only need just a little bit of it, so please let me borrow your time. It spoke words of apology, but, compared to genuine words of regret, its words felt far more self-righteous, as if prioritizing its own intentions. That shivering voice broke, sharply. Listening to it was painful on the ears, and there was a fierce, desperate need to remove that discomfort immediately. The reason for that strange feeling could perhaps be traced to that figure's off-putting appearance. The figure's head was entirely wrapped in bandages, leaving only its dazzling eyes uncovered. Its body was wrapped tightly with a black jacket, and both wrists were captured by a long chain, the ends of which dragged on ground, swaying both left and right as their owner paced the tower. It offered the masses a strange gesture, a smile, perhaps, but the bandages concealed and distorted its mouth too much for the expression to be comforting. My apologies, I'm the witch cult Sin Archbishop of Wrath. After saying that terrible title, the figure reported its name. I am called Sirius Romanicanti. With malice, she smiled. End of chapter 15 to 18, A Deafening Silence.